Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the darkest, most forgotten corners of Dark Souls 3. The wildest lore facts about a world on the edge of ending, where gods have turned to sludge, warriors share a single soul, and the fires that once lit the heavens are barely a flicker. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. Aldrich was still eating Gwyndolin. During the boss fight, the Dark Moon Longbow's item description quietly confirms something horrifying. Gwyndolin was only gradually devoured by Aldrich, meaning the consumption was still actively ongoing by the time you arrive. During the boss fight itself, shrieks and moans can be heard from Gwyndolин's half-eaten form. The wiki notes this strongly implies Gwyndolin was barely alive, kept in a semi-conscious state of continuous consumption throughout. The god of the Dark Moon, last ruler of Anor Londo, had been kept in this state of living consumption for an indeterminate stretch of time, his body puppeted and weaponized while what remained of his mind faded in and out of awareness. You are not simply fighting Aldrich. You are interrupting a meal still in progress, and the creature you battle is wearing a god like a marionette. Every arrow fired, every spell cast, forced from flesh that no longer belongs to its owner. It is one of the most disturbing images in the entire Soul series, made all the more haunting because the game never stops to explain it. You simply notice if you are paying close enough attention. Aldrich dreamed of Priscilla while devouring Gwyndolin. The Life Hunt Scythe miracle, obtainable by transposing Aldrich's soul, carries a description that quietly reveals something extraordinary. As Aldrich slowly consumed the god of the Dark Moon, he entered a dream, and in that dream he perceived the form of a young, pale girl in hiding. The identity of this girl has fueled debate for years, but the most supported interpretation points toward either crossbreed Priscilla from the original Dark Souls, or Yorshka, the half-dragon captain of the Dark Moon Covenant, hidden at the top of Irithil's chapel. The implication is staggering either way. Aldrich could absorb the memories and abilities of those he consumed, and the Life Hunt Scythe he manifests in battle appears to channel powers associated with Priscilla. Whether he devoured her directly or simply inherited a vision through Gwyndolин's dying memories remains one of the game's most deliberately unanswered questions. Aldrich was originally just a cleric who liked eating people. Before he became a mass of rotting bone sludge capable of swallowing gods whole, Aldrich was described simply as a cleric who developed a habit of devouring men, as Hawkwood tells it plainly in Filing Shrine. He ate so many that he bloated like a drowned pig, then softened into sludge. There was no grand curse, no divine trial, no tragic origin. He simply found that he liked it. He liked it so much that his body transformed around his appetite. The Church of the Deep, built in his honor, provided him with a steady stream of sacrifices. Children were among those offered to him. The deacons of the deep clothed their service to a cannibal in the language of prophecy, speaking of visions of a coming age of deep water, as if this justified every scream their god produced. Aldrich's ascent to Lord of Cinder was not earned through heroism. It was earned through sheer mass of consumed souls, might, not virtue, as Hawkwood coldly notes. The twin princes were cursed by their own family. Lothric, the younger prince, was supposed to link the first flame. That was his entire purpose from birth, the entire point of his existence as far as the Lothric bloodline was concerned. But Lothric was born frail, sickly, pale, and thin-armed, his soul described as vanishing. lacking the spiritual substance needed to fuel the flame properly. Desperate to force the issue, the royal family resorted to what the law calls repulsive acts. They bound the souls of both princes together through a curse, hoping to merge Lorien's battle-hardened spirit with Lothric's designated role. Lorien, a celebrated knight who had single-handedly slain a demon prince, a feat that permanently scorched his sword and, based on what the law implies, may have already severely damaged his legs before the curse compounded his condition, apparently accepted the soul binding willingly. The brothers who watch you from the top of Lothric Castle were not born inseparable. They were made that way by a family that treated them as kindling. Lorien killed the demon prince before the game even begins, one of the most quietly impressive backstory accomplishments in Dark Souls. 3 belongs not to any player character, but to Lorien, Elder Prince. His greatswords. Description states directly that before Lorien embraced his brother's curse, he was a knight who single-handedly slayed the demon prince, and that the victory eternally scorched his sword with flame. The demon prince boss found in the Ringed City DLC is the same figure, or its revival at the end of time. Lorien's victory over it came at severe cost. The Chaos Fire scorched his sword permanently black, and based on the lore of the demon prince, the battle with Lorien is what initiated the near extinction of demonkind, the demon prince retreating beneath the earth. By the time you encounter Lorien in Lothric Castle, this former titan of battle is crawling on his knees. Whether it was the demon prince fight that destroyed his legs, the later soul-binding curse, or some combination of both is left to interpretation. But the item description makes clear that a man capable of this deed became someone who can no longer stand, which makes the image of him carrying his frail brother on his back all the more staggering. Lothric chose to let the fire die and invited you to watch. Unlike every other Lord of Cinder you pursue through the game, Lothric never ran from his duty. He simply decided, quietly and with complete composure, not to do it. His throne sits empty at Firelink Shrine, never claimed. When you finally confront him, he greets you not with hostility, but with something closer to tired amusement, telling you that the mantle of Lord interests him none, that the fire-linking curse and the legacy of Lords should simply fade into nothing. He invites you, genuinely, to sit with him and let it all end. One of his mentors, heavily implied to be Aldia, the scholar of the first sin from Dark Souls 2, had taught him to doubt the entire cycle. And Lothric, a child born for a purpose he never asked for, had taken that lesson to its logical conclusion. He was not a villain. He was someone who had simply been told what he was for his entire life, and finally said no. Yhorm sacrificed himself to save a people who doubted him. Yhorm the Giant was the descendant of a conqueror who had subjugated his people. He was asked by those very same people, the descendants of those his ancestor had enslaved, to become their guardian and protector. They doubted him from the beginning, afraid of his size and his bloodline. To earn their trust, Yhorm did something extraordinary. He took one of the 2 storm rulers, the only weapons capable of defeating him, and gave it to the humans who feared him, placing his own weakness in their hands as a gesture of good faith. The other he gave to his dearest friend, Sigurd of Katarina, with a private promise attached. When the profane flame threatened to consume the profane capital, Yhorm became a Lord of Cinder to extinguish it. He failed. The flame destroyed the city anyway, incinerating his people, and Yhorm woke from his cindering to find nothing but ruins and corpses. By the time you reach him, the giant has gone hollow, and the bodies piled around his throne may be the remains of those who tried to use that gift he gave them. Sigurd made a promise to kill his best friend, the cheerful onion knight who gets stuck in wells and shares soup with you across campfires, carries one of the heaviest burdens in the game. Long before the events of Dark Souls 3, Sigurd and Yorm formed a friendship that spanned the distance between a lonely giant lord and a wandering Catarinian knight. When Yorm chose to face his fate as a Lord of Cinder, he gave Sigurd the second Storm Ruler and extracted a promise. If he ever returned from the cindering as something wrong, something hollow, Sigurd was to come and end it. When you progress Sigurd's questline far enough, he appears without summoning at the fog gate of the profane capital. He walks in beside you, raises his weapon, and calls out to his friend by name. His words in that moment carry the full weight of everything he survived to reach it. Dungeons, deception, a stolen suit of armor. He came to keep a promise. That's all. The Abyss Watchers were fighting each other before you arrived. When you enter the boss arena at Farron Keep, the Abyss Watchers are already mid-battle with one another. Some of them have red eyes, the mark of Abyss corruption, and the uncorrupted are systematically executing them. This is not chaos. This is the final expression of the oath they swore. The undead legion of Farron was sworn by the wolf's blood to contain the Abyss, and their vow was absolute. At the first sign of Abyss exposure, the legion would bury the infected, even when the infected were themselves. The item description for the soul of the blood of the wolf notes that their blood was spread amongst all of the Watchers, and that their souls are one with the soul of the wolf blood master, which has led many to interpret the internecine fighting as something like a shared consciousness turned against its own corrupted parts, though the game leaves the precise nature of that binding open to reading. What is clear is that you inherit a civil war when you step through that fog gate, and the weapon you can craft from their soul belongs to Artorias, the original Wolfblood Master whose failure they were born to redeem. Hawkwood was a deserter. Before he took up residence in Firelink Shrine and offered you sardonic commentary on the world, Hawkwood was a member of the Undead Legion. He shares their armor, their build, and their knowledge of the wolf blood. He simply left. At some point during the Legion's deterioration, as the wolf blood dried up, as Farron was consumed by the festering wood, as his brothers began fighting each other with abyss-red eyes, Hawkwood walked away. His questline reflects someone who still carries the weight of that. He eventually challenges you specifically over the path of the dragon, trying to claim something for himself that might replace the purpose he abandoned. He gives you the Farron ring after the Watcher's fall, a ring that was likely worn by Legion members. He wasn't there at the end. He chose not to be. That decision sits behind every dry remark he makes in the shrine, an unnamed guilt he never quite names. Gwyn's firstborn was erased from history. Before the nameless king was nameless, he was Gwyn's firstborn son. The original god of war, the heir of lightning, master of Dragonslayer Ornstein, and founder of the Warriors of Sunlight Covenant. He fought beside his father in the war against the everlasting dragons, using sunlight-imbued weapons to pierce their scales. He was so central to the Age of Gods that statues of him stood at altars of sunlight across multiple ages and kingdoms. And then one day, he decided the dragons were not enemies. He chose to side with them, the very creatures he had spent his divine existence hunting. Gwyn, who hated dragons more than anything that had ever existed, responded by striking his firstborn's name from the annals entirely, destroying the statues, removing every record, the firstborn did not die. He simply ceased to officially exist. Gwyn erased his own son from history rather than acknowledge that his greatest warrior had come to believe the war was wrong. The Nameless King tamed a dragon. After being banished, following his expulsion from Anna Londo's records, Gwyn's firstborn made his way to Archdragon Peak, a place so remote that reaching it requires meditating in a specific posture while staring at distant mountains until the world transports you. There he tamed a storm drake, which he called the King of the Storm, and fought beside it in countless battles. His dragon-scale armor was crafted from the hides of creatures he had hunted in his previous life. When the storm drake falls during your fight with him, the Nameless King drives his own spear through the creature's head and absorbs its soul. Not in cruelty, but, as was the custom in the Age of Gods, absorbing the souls of fallen comrades to carry them forward. He kills his companion to fight you properly. The dragon he spent an age beside, after being cast out by his father, he kills in a single motion, and then turns to face you with the full weight of what that cost him written nowhere on his face. The Nameless King's theme contains Gwyn's theme. The musical score for the Nameless King's boss fight contains subtle melodic elements drawn from Gwyn's theme in the original Dark Souls. This is not accidental. From Software's composers have a deliberate practice of embedding musical ancestry into boss themes. The Soul of Cinder fight famously contains Gwyn's theme as its foundation. The presence of Gwyn's melody in the Nameless King's music functions as an audio confirmation of what item descriptions only strongly imply. This is the son of Gwyn. The arrangement transforms the original theme, giving it something wilder, more storm-tossed, more like lightning than embers, reflecting a man who took his father's gift of sunlight and turned it toward a life his father would have considered betrayal. When he is defeated, the words "Heir of Fire Destroyed" appear on screen, the same words that appear when you defeat the Soul of Cinder. He was an heir of fire, even in exile. Ornstein left Anna Londo, looking for the Nameless King. The fate of Dragonslayer. Ornstein, after the events of the original Dark Souls, is one of the most discussed mysteries in the series. In Dark Souls 3, you can find Ornstein's full armor set at Archdragon Peak, scattered near the boss arena, where the Nameless King resides. The description on the armor states that Ornstein set out from Anna Londo in search of the Nameless King in the Dragonless Age. He was the Firstborn's first knight, trained by him, loyal to him. And after the Age of Gods fractured and Gwyn was gone, Ornstein apparently chose devotion over station. He left behind Anna Londo, left behind whatever remained of his old life, and went looking for the man who had been erased from history. Whether he found him, whether the Nameless King recognized him, whether Ornstein is somewhere in that strange, storm-swept peak still, the game does not say. The armor sits there silent, as so many answers do in this world. Pontiff Sulivan was born. Inside a painting, the description of the spell Snap Freeze, found in the Painted World of Ariandel DLC, contains a line that recontextualizes one of the game's most imposing villains entirely. The spell was created by the young sorcerer Sulivan before he left the Painted World, and the description notes plainly that Sulivan was born and raised inside the painting, yet had little use for his frigid homeland, since he had not yet experienced loss. Pontiff Sulivan, the tyrant who enslaved Erithil, imprisoned a god, fed that god to a cannibal, and transformed outrider knights into mindless beasts through cursed rings, grew up in the same artificial refuge for tormented souls that contains Father Ariandel and Sister Frida. In the Painted World itself, there is a grieving tree woman who weeps over the location where Snap Freeze can be found. Cut audio files suggest she may be calling for a lost child. Sullivan was not born with a crown. He was born cold, and he left before he could feel what it meant to lose something. Sullivan poisoned or weakened Gwyndolin. Before feeding him to Aldrich, the lore surrounding Gwyndolin's fate is more layered than it first appears. Yorshka, Gwyndolin's half-dragon sister, hidden at the top of the Dark Moon Chapel in Irithyll, explains in her dialogue that Sullivan used Gwyndolин's illness to assume the title of pontiff. The timing matters. Sullivan did not simply show up and find a vulnerable god. He appears to have engineered the vulnerability. His sole description states that he imprisoned the chief god of the former royal family in an abandoned cathedral and ultimately offered him to the devourer. There is a gap between the imprisonment and the offering, a period during which Gwyndolin, isolated and weakening, provided no obstacle to Sullivan's seizure of power. The great sword of judgment, held in Sullivan's left hand and representing the judgment of the Dark Moon, is noted to be imbued with sorcery, a weapon that outwardly symbolizes loyalty to Gwyndolин's own covenant, while secretly embodying the heresy that overthrew it. Sullivan's outrider knights were transformed against their will. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley and Vort of the Boreal Valley share something tragic in common. Both were once human outrider knights of Pontiff Sullivan. Sullivan bestowed rings upon the knights he dispatched to foreign lands, rings that granted enhanced ability in battle, while slowly transforming their wearers into twisted, bestial forms. This was not a side effect he failed to anticipate. The rings were engineered to ensure loyalty by removing the very capacity for disloyalty. Once the transformation was complete, the knights could not rebel. The enormous wolf-like creatures called Sullivan's beasts, roaming the outskirts of Irithyll, are outrider knights who managed to return home, still loyal, still guarding, still recognizably shaped around their original purpose, even as their minds are long gone. Every beast in Irithyll was once a person who swore an oath to serve and received a ring in exchange for their humanity. The Deacons of the Deep used to wear red. Before Aldrich led his forces into Irithyll, the Deacons of the Deep wore red robes and carried themselves as guardians of the cathedral, tasked with sealing away the horrors that had accumulated in its depths. After Aldrich's resurrection and his conquest of Anolondo alongside Sullivan, the Deacons abandoned their red vestments for dark blue, symbolizing their shift in devotion from sacred stewardship to worship of the deep sea. This transformation, this is visible in the fight itself. The first waves of deacons you push through are illuminated by the hostile red of corruption, but the creature at the center, Archdeacon Royce, carries something of the original order's authority twisted into a new shape. After Aldrich left for Anolondo, Royce stayed in the cathedral to keep eternal watch over his master's empty coffin. The deacons represent an entire religious institution that quietly changed its gods and its colors without anyone in the outside world noticing. Rosaria is quietly hiding something enormous. Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth, sits in a hidden chamber in the Cathedral of the Deep, allowing players to reallocate their stats and alter their appearance. She never speaks. She has no tongue. The covenant surrounding her, Rosaria's fingers, collects tongues as tribute, and the item description for pale tongues notes that the offer of a tongue earns Rosaria's tongue in return. She is surrounded by man-grubs, crawling, creatures that resemble the bloated pale forms associated with Aldrich. One theory, supported by lore fragments throughout the cathedral, suggests that Rosaria was once Guinevere's daughter, and that the man-grubs surrounding her are former members of her covenant who underwent too many rebirths. The game's mechanics allow a player to remake their appearance 5 times before they are transformed into a grub permanently. Rosaria's chamber is full of grubs. Her silence is not peaceful. It is a room full of what happened to everyone who trusted in too many second chances. The Cathedral of the Deep was built to seal horrors away. The Cathedral of the Deep was not always a place of worship for Aldrich. Its original purpose was containment. The deep, whatever it truly is, a metaphysical concept associated with the abyss, with the darkest accumulated dregs of human souls sinking to the lowest imaginable depths, had begun collecting things, abhorrent things. The cathedral was built to be a vault for them, sealed and maintained by a religious order, tasked with ensuring none of it escaped. Over time, the order became exposed to what they were guarding. The deep, according to an item description, was originally a peaceful and sacred place that became the final rest for many abhorrent things. Aldrich, the cleric who ate children and dreamed of a world submerged in darkness, was eventually placed inside the cathedral by those same clergy. They were not sealing something away. They were feeding it. The evangelists were delivering people to the cathedral. The large, slow-moving female enemies wielding flails who roam the road of sacrifices and undead settlement are called evangelists. They belong to the Church of the Deep. The road of sacrifices takes its name not from any battlefield, but from its function. It was the path that evangelists used to transport victims from the undead settlement to the Cathedral of the Deep. The settlement itself is full of cages, hanging bodies, fire pits, and evidence of systematic selection. People were being gathered, sorted, sent down the road. The evangelists who patrol the settlement and the road are still on duty, still performing their function, still announcing the cathedral's dominion over those they find there. One of their flame attacks, a slow, forward lunge that grabs a player and burns them, evokes the way a religious figure might embrace a convert. Every evangelist you encounter is still conducting the same errand that defined them, even after the order they served has long collapsed into sludge. High Lord Wulnir was a tyrant who fell into the abyss. High Lord Wulnir ruled Carthus, a once vast desert kingdom whose crimson warriors conquered and absorbed kingdoms across the known world. He was terrified of death. According to his soul description, Volnir discovered that the gods of the old world feared nothing so much as the dark, and so he used sacrificial rites to steal the power of their crowns. 3 golden bracelets, each a stolen divine authority, worn around his wrists. When he finally fell into the abyss, the darkness he had avoided his entire life consumed him completely, reducing him to a massive skeleton animated by corruption. His fight takes place in a void of pure darkness, lit only by those stolen bracelets and a cup of black fog he breathes toward you. If you destroy the bracelets, the light holding him together fails, and he collapses. His entire existence in death is held together by stolen divinity. The man who feared nothing more than the dark became the dark, kept together only by the gods he had plundered in life. Farron Keep was once Ulakyle. The swamp of Farron Keep, home to the Abyss Watchers and their decaying keep, sits on ground with a deeper history than its current inhabitants suggest. Environmental details throughout the area, dead mushroom people, golden sorceries found within, equipment belonging to Faris the Hunter, all point toward a significant theory supported by multiple lore sources. Farron Keep occupies the same geography as Ulasil, the ancient kingdom consumed by the Abyss during the events of Dark Souls 1's Artorias, of the Abyss, DLC. The name Artorias later inspired the undead legion that made its home here. The moss and rot and fetid water of the keep may be the remnant of the chaos that consumed Ulasail, and the 3 bonfires you must extinguish in the swamp are positioned near stone plaques depicting the original Lords of Cinder from the first game, Nito, the Bed of Chaos, and the 4 Kings, as if the place holds memory of every fire that came before. Gundir was supposed to be the chosen undead. Champion Gundir, the optional boss, hidden in the untended graves, arrived at Firelink Shrine with a specific purpose: to guide a Lord of Cinder to their throne and ensure the linking of the flame. He came too late. By the time he reached Firelink, the fire had already faded, the Age of Darkness had already begun, and there was no Firekeeper waiting to greet him. He was seized by the coiled sword in his chest and consumed, left there to wait in a shrine that no longer functioned, for a purpose that had already passed him by. The untended graves where Champion Gundir is found is a dark mirror of the starting cemetery of Ash. The same layout, the same paths, but shrouded in absolute darkness. Every bonfire cold, every space heavy with the feeling of something that was supposed to happen and didn't. Gundir's story is a quiet tragedy tucked behind an illusory wall. A man who arrived in time for nothing and was left holding a duty the world had moved past. The untended graves exists, outside of time. The untended graves is not simply a darker version of the cemetery of Ash. It is the same location at a different point in the cycle, or perhaps the same location under radically different metaphysical conditions. Ludlith of Corlin warns you, when you show him the eyes of a Firekeeper found there, that the knowledge those eyes carry would grant the Firekeeper a vision of the dark ending, the Age of Dark ushered in, if the flame is allowed to die. The item description for the eyes states that they were taken from a dead Firekeeper, and that they reveal what lies beyond the reach of light. The untended graves contains a bonfire called the Firelink Shrine that cannot be kindled. Udex Gundir's equivalent in that space is Champion Gundir, who is, lore suggests, the same Gundir further along in decay, having spent uncounted time waiting in a shrine that never woke. The place exists as a warning about what Firelink Shrine will become if no one comes to light it again. The eyes of a Firekeeper show the ending you're not supposed to take. Tucked in the untended graves, sitting in a dark and dead version of the Firekeeper's usual perch, are the eyes of a Firekeeper. If you give them to the Firekeeper in the living Firelink Shrine, she will begin to describe the vision they show her. A world without fire, cold and quiet, lit by gentle stars and open to something new, something free of the cycle of sacrifice and rebirth. She does not want this. She says it frightens her. She will give the eyes back if you ask. The ending unlocked by keeping the eyes and asking her to act on her vision is the Age of Dark ending, where the flame is allowed to go out. Ludlith calls it a foul betrayal and warns you against it. But the Firekeeper, describing what she sees with quiet awe, sounds as much like someone who has glimpsed something beautiful as someone who has glimpsed something terrible. The game does not tell you what the right ending is. It tells you what everyone in power is afraid of. Karthi has been manipulating events since Dark Souls 1. Yuria of Londor, a key figure in the Lord of Hollows questline, an unkindled ally, speaks her dying words if you kill her in Firelink Shrine. Those words are simply, Karthi, I have failed thee. The primordial serpent Kingseeker Framp's rival, the hidden persuader, who in the original Dark Souls urged the chosen undead toward the Age of Dark, has been engineering events from the shadows all along. Yol of Londor, who offers you free level-ups in exchange for dark sigils that accumulate hollowing, is part of Carth's organization. Uria, who arrives after you accept enough sigils and guides you toward marrying the pilgrim Henri and usurping the flame, is an agent of Carth's will. The entire usurpation of fire ending, where you extinguish the first flame and crown yourself the Lord of Hollows, is Carth's plan. He never appears in the game. He sends emissaries, arranges proxies, engineers a king, and remains unseen, pulling every thread from somewhere in the dark. Dark sigils accumulate hollowing with each death. When Yol of Londor offers to draw out your true strength, what he actually does is inscribe a dark sigil onto your soul. Each sigil represents an opening through which the dark of the abyss bleeds into you, and each time you die, the hollowing advances. Your face grows more ashen, more skeletal, more visibly undead. The game treats this as a mechanical penalty, something to be cleansed. But the usurpation ending requires you to reach maximum hollowing to proceed, meaning the path to the Lord of Hollows ending is literally paved with your deaths. The ritual Uria guides you toward involves finding Henri of Astra, laid out in Gwyn's honorary tomb in Anor Londo, prepared by a Londor pilgrim. And the Ashen One drives the sword of avowal into Henri's face to absorb their remaining dark sigils. You become Lord of Hollows by accumulating death, by being hollowed over and over, and by performing a ritual marriage that is really an absorption, using another person's darkness to complete your own. The price of that particular power is written on your face by the end. Henri of Astora is on a quest of doomed devotion. Henri of Astora is always in love with the Ashen One. The game never makes this explicit, but the way their quest line is written, searching for Horus, guiding you toward the Lord of Hollows ritual if you betray them, or walking into death alone if you don't, carries an undercurrent of quiet devotion that makes their arc one of the saddest in the game. Their companion Horus the Hushed fell to madness from abyss exposure and descended into Smoldering Lake, where he attacks everything he encounters. If you tell Henri where Horus is, they will go to find him and be killed by the thing their friend became. If you say nothing, Henri survives, but is eventually sacrificed for a ritual they never fully understand. The tragic detail embedded in Henri's design is that the character is gender swapped, depending on the player character's gender, always appearing as the opposite, always romantically coded, always just beyond the reach of a connection the game never allows you to actually make. Horus the Hushed was silent because he was terrified. Horus, Henri's companion, never speaks. His equipment description explains that he lost his tongue as a child, taken prisoner and enslaved in a place of darkness from which he managed to escape. He eventually found Henri, and the two traveled together toward Firelink Shrine. But the trauma of whatever he experienced in that darkness never left him. When you follow their quest lines deep into the catacombs of Carthus and through to Smoldering Lake, Horus separates from Henri and descends toward the abyss-tainted area below. He appears to have been broken by the proximity to abyssal corruption. The darkness that already lived in his memory finding new purchase. The Horus you find in Smoldering Lake is hostile, unrecognizing, swinging blindly at everything around him. The gentle guardian who walked with Henri is still technically present, but what was left of his peace has dissolved entirely. You have to kill him. Henri, if they go looking, dies the same way. Siris of the Sunless Realms is protecting a legacy. She cannot escape. Siris has one of the most personal quest lines in the game, and one of the quietest motivations. She is the granddaughter of Holy Knight Hodrick, a member of the Moundmaker's Covenant who invades as a mad phantom if certain conditions are met, and who has clearly gone hollow and lost his grip on who he is. Hodrick, a warrior broken by undeath, still views Cirith as someone to protect in his own fragmented way. She views him as someone to finally lay to rest. Her questline involves rejecting Rosaria's covenant, helping you fight off invaders, and eventually killing Hodrick herself so he can have peace. She dies shortly after. Her last words leave her soul to you and note that she can now rest with her grandfather. She did not save anyone. She did not change the world. She tracked down a broken old man and gave him the mercy of ending, and then followed him into rest. In a game full of grand gestures, Cirith's story is one of the smallest and most human. Patches has saved Greirat at least once and would try again. Unbreakable Patches, thief, liar, serial looter of clerics, maintains a genuine friendship with the old thief Greirat that the game only hints at through incidental dialogue. When Greirat ventures out on his second scavenging mission to Irithyll, Patches becomes visibly agitated, refusing to sell you anything until you tell him where Greirat has gone. If you do, he leaves Firelink Shrine and goes to find him. This is presented as if Patches might be going to rob him, but the result, if timed correctly, is that Greirat returns alive. Patches actually rescues him. A man whose defining characteristic is looking out only for himself makes a rescue attempt into one of the most dangerous cities in Lothric, because a rat he met in a dungeon once did him a good turn. When Greirat finally goes to Lothric Castle for his last scavenging mission, Patches refuses to go after him. He tells you plainly it's a death trap, and he's right. The friendship has a limit, and the limit is a place Patches knows he cannot survive. Greirat's ashes are found on the rooftop of the Grand Archives. Greirat and Patches met in Lothric Dungeon. Before the game, the first thing Patches says when you encounter him as a merchant in Firelink Shrine, after he apologizes for locking you in a tower, is that he met Greirat in Lothric Dungeon, and that the old thief did him a good turn there. The exact nature of what Greirat did for Patches is never stated, but the fact that it registers as a debt in Patches' worldview is significant. Patches is a man who defines every relationship through what can be gained or owed. For Greirat to have earned something resembling loyalty, whatever he did must have been considerable. Both of them were imprisoned in Lothric at some point before you arrive. Both survived, and both found their way to Firelink Shrine, as if drawn there by the same gravitational pull of people who have nothing left to lose and have learned to keep moving anyway. The game tells you almost nothing about their shared history. The affection between them is entirely in the edges of what they say. Greirat's final death cannot be prevented. Every other NPC death in Dark Souls 3 can theoretically be prevented with the right sequence of actions at the right time. Greirat's third and final scavenging trip to Lothric Castle is different. His death there is guaranteed. No matter what conditions you meet, no matter what order you accomplish things in, Greirat will not return from Lothric Castle. Patches refuses to follow him. Sigurd, if alive, also cannot reach him there. His ashes appear on the rooftop of the Grand Archives, and that is where his story ends. Not in a dramatic confrontation, not in a meaningful sacrifice, but alone on a rooftop he should never have climbed, having gone one trip farther than anyone could have saved him from. Giving his ashes to the shrine handmaid is the only thing left to do. She inherits his stock. His prices, which he lowered for you personally over the course of your time together, revert to standard. The small warmth of a relationship built over shared scavenging trips collapses back to transaction. Ludleth of Courland was a lord of Cinder who exiled himself. The small, frail figure sitting in the throne intended for the Lord of Courland, the one Lord of Cinder who actually returned to his seat without needing to be forced, has one of the most cryptic backstories among the five. Ludleth is the only lord who seems to understand what is happening, who speaks with you willingly, who offers transposition services. His background is fragmented. He was linked to the fire and then betrayed the city of Courland somehow, earning his exile. He chose to come back to Firelink Shrine on his own terms, and he sits in his throne with the patience of someone who has made peace with every decision they have ever made. He warns you about the eyes of a firekeeper, not out of self-interest, but out of genuine concern for the firekeeper. His legs are burned to charred stumps. He arrived in Firelink on will alone, dragging himself to a seat he earned through survival, waiting quietly to do the one thing left to him when the time comes. Rosaria's covenant collects tongues to give to someone who has none. The pale tongues collected by Rosaria's fingers, the covenant centered around rebirth, devoted to Rosaria, mother of rebirth, serve as devotional offering. The item description states that the offer of a tongue earns Rosaria's tongue in return. Rosaria herself, found mute and still in the Cathedral of the Deep, has no tongue to give. Every tongue brought to her is placed with a woman who cannot speak, offered to someone whose silence is not chosen but taken. The covenant's practices, invading worlds, harvesting tokens from blue sentinels and dark moon blades, align it functionally with the Aldrich faithful, since dark moon blades are enemies of the faithful. Rosaria sits at the heart of a cathedral run by Aldrich's followers, surrounded by man-grubs who were once her own devoted, and every tongue brought to her is a small cruelty that does nothing for the woman receiving it, serving only the appetite of whatever has replaced her original self. Hazel was a daughter of Crystal Sage, Yellowfinger Hazel, who invades you in the Crucifixion Woods and can later be found at the Rosaria's Fingers Covenant, carries the Xanthouse crown, an item associated in the Soul series with sorcerers who pursued lost and forbidden sorceries. Her set belongs to the scholars of Farron's Abyss Watchers, who relied on only the most practical sorceries, but her invasion sign and later presence at Rosaria suggest a sorcerer who abandoned pure scholarship for the Rebirth Covenant. The Crystal, sages who appear in the Road of Sacrifices and the Grand Archives, were preacher twins known for bestowing rings on the Abyss Watchers, and the design connection between Hazel and that magical lineage is present in her equipment. She represents the way Dark Souls 3 peppers its world with characters who exist at the edges of the major factions, shaped by them without being defined by them, carrying histories you reconstruct from armored descriptions and the location of their invasion sign. The ringed city was a gift that was also a prison. At the very end of the world, past the Dreg Heap, through the ruins of every age collapsed into a single geography, sits the ringed city. Gwyn gave it to the Pygmies, the progenitors of humanity, as a gift following the conclusion of the war with the everlasting dragons. He gave them a city, a princess, and the power of the dark soul parceled out among their descendants. He also gave them fingers, called the ringed knight's armor, and ringed the city with covenants and guardians designed to ensure that no one who carried the dark soul was ever supposed to leave. The Pygmies were given a home that was also a containment. Gwyn wrapped his distrust of humanity in the language of blessing, surrounded the gift with divine power, and told the small dark souls of mankind that they were special, while building walls around them. the world of Dark Souls 3 in the Ringed City DLC, ends with a revelation that the Age of Gods was always an architecture of control. Princess Filianora was never sleeping. At the heart of the Ringed City's inner sanctum sits Princess Filianore, youngest daughter of Gwyn, curled around a cracked egg. The inscription around the area warns travelers not to wake her, framing her sleep as a guardian's rest, a divine seal holding something delicate together. When you touch the egg, she wakes, and the entire world dissolves. You are transported to a desolate landscape at the literal end of time, bleached bones and grey skies, and a faded sun. Filianore was never sleeping in the conventional sense. The egg she cradled was the mechanism through which she maintained the illusion of the Ringed City at a particular point in time. The gentle moment preserved, artificially held, while the world outside crumbled to ash. She was the city's denial. Her awakening is not a rescue. It is the lifting of a delusion that had been maintained for the entirety of the series. Slave Knight Gale consumed the dark souls of all humanity. Slave Knight Gale, the final boss of the Ringed City DLC, and arguably the final boss of the entire Dark Souls trilogy, began as a humble slave knight. The lowest class of warrior in the Lothric hierarchy, barely above a servant, sent ahead into dangerous areas to absorb whatever dangers lay there before proper knights arrived. His story started with his niece, the young unnamed painter in the painted world of Ariandel, who needed the blood of the dark soul to paint a new world. Gale set out across time and space to find that pigment, unable to obtain it through conventional means because the dark soul in its pure form had long since dispersed into countless human bodies. He solved this the only way available to him. He ate everyone. He consumed humanity, era by era, world by world, gathering the concentrated essence of the dark soul until he himself became an embodiment of it, sprawling, monstrous, mad, wrapped in a red cape that has been dragging through the dust of ages. When you fight him at the end of time, he is both the final enemy and the final sacrifice, carrying everything that remains of human history in a body that can barely contain it. The blood of the dark soul paints a new world. When you defeat Slave Knight Gale and collect the blood of the dark soul, the key item that seems purposeless at first glance, you carry it back to the painted world. The young painter takes it, and she begins painting. The implication is that a new painted world will be created, a new refuge, a new possibility, something that grew from the concentrated darkness of all human experience, rather than from the divine light of gods who feared what humanity was. The Ringed City DLC ends not with a traditional credits roll, but with a simple image and an implication. The cycle ends here, and what comes next is not another linking of the flame, but something made by a child from the blood of the last person willing to carry the weight of an entire age. After 3 games of fire and sacrifice and the same desperate loop, the last image is someone painting a door to somewhere new. It is the quietest possible ending to one of the darkest stories ever told in a game. Sister Frieda was the first Ash. Sister Frieda, the silent guardian of the painted world of Ariandel, and one of the most technically demanding boss fights in the game, is described in her soul's item as the first of the unkindled. Unkindled are those who tried to link the first flame and failed, their bodies burned to ash, their souls left wandering without purpose. Frieda found the painted world and chose to remain there, not because she believed in it, but because she wanted to rest. She convinced Father Ariandel to stop burning the rotten world and preserve it, not out of love for Ariandel specifically, but because she was tired. She wanted the world to stay still. She wanted nothing to change and no fire to demand anything of her again. When you arrive, threatening to kindle what she has spent her undead existence protecting from the flames, she fights you 3 times across a single encounter. Each phase a different layer of the exhausted ferocity of someone who came to a painted world to finally be left alone and cannot get even that. Father Ariandel is punishing himself. The massive, ancient figure chained to a bowl of blood at the heart of the painted world of Ariandel is not simply a guardian. Father Ariandel created the painted world, constructed and painted it into existence, and has been flagellating himself with the chains around his body for longer than can be easily measured. The blood he adds to the bowl is his own, and his suffering is self-imposed penance. Painted worlds, in the soul's law, are supposed to be burned periodically to allow them to be reborn. Ariandel, persuaded by Frida to preserve rather than burn, chose against that cycle, and the rot that crept into the world as a consequence is the result of his single act of mercy for a tired woman who asked him to keep things still. He accepted the chains and the blood as his punishment for that choice, continuing to suffer indefinitely rather than destroy what he and Frida had decided to preserve. When you fight him in the 3rd phase, he wrenches himself free and attacks with the desperation of something that has been suffering for a very long time and no longer cares what it destroys. The Corvians worship a goddess who punishes gods. Throughout the painted world of Ariandel, the Corvians, humans who have allowed their devotion to a forgotten god to transform their bodies into crow-like beings, growing feathers and beaks through sheer force of faith, worship Velka, the goddess of sin. Velka is one of the oldest and most obscure figures in the soul's law, a deity who holds authority over the punishment of those who commit sins, including other gods. She exists outside the normal hierarchy of Anor Londo, accountable to nothing, and her worshippers are accordingly those who exist outside structures of power. Criminals, exiles, the wronged. Pontiff Sullivan, who came from the painted world, appears to have made it a priority to suppress Velka's worship after seizing power, understanding that a goddess who punishes gods is an uncomfortable thing to leave intact when you have decided to make yourself one. The Corvians, who tend Frida's memory in Ariandel, are preserving a faith that everyone with power wanted forgotten. Archdragon Peak may be a collective dream. The method of reaching Archdragon Peak is unlike any other area in the game. You must find the path of the dragon gesture in the consumed king's garden, then locate a specific meditation spot in the Irithil dungeon. Sit in that posture facing the distant mountains and wait. After several seconds, you are transported. There is no door, no fog gate, no physical transition, only a seated figure and then a new world. The lore notes in Fextralife's wiki for the Nameless King suggest that Archdragon Peak may not be a physical location at all, but a collective dream, a space assembled by the genuine belief of those who seek to become dragons, made tangible through the same mechanism that makes miracles real in the soul's world, the strength of a story believed intensely enough. If that is true, the Nameless King you fight there may not be the real firstborn son of Gwyn, but his legend, summoned and made flesh by the faith of those who came to that mountain to find him. The Darkmoon Covenant's blue sentinels are almost mythological. The Blades of the Dark Moon, members of the Covenant dedicated to protecting the innocent and punishing sinners, are so rare as to be effectively legends in the multiplayer of Dark Souls 3. The Covenant requires farming a specific item from Silver Knights in Anor Londo, and then waiting in a matchmaking pool that historically has had almost no activity. The lore of the Covenant stretches back to Gwyndolin and the Blue Sentinels of Dark Souls 2, the Dark Moon Blades of the original, and the concept that Gwyn created a secret society of divine enforcers to protect the Path of Fire. In the world of Dark Souls 3, with Gwyndolin consumed and Sullivan in power, the Dark Moon has essentially died as an active force. The Blades of the Dark Moon exist in the game's mechanics and in memory, guarding a Covenant bonfire in a dark chapel where Yorshka waits in her tower, loyal to a dead god, maintaining the form of an institution that has not functioned in a very long time. Yorshka has been imprisoned for centuries. Company Captain Yorshka, half-dragon daughter of Gwyn, waits at the top of a tall tower in Irithil, accessible only by a hidden illusory railing. She cannot leave. She has been there, by implication, since Sullivan's rise to power, locked away after her brother Gwyndolin was imprisoned and fed to Aldrich. She serves in isolation, as the officer of a covenant that no longer has active members, maintaining her title and her post with the patience of someone who has been waiting so long that the waiting itself has become the only remaining shape of devotion. When you find her, she speaks of Gwyndolin with reverence and grief that span centuries. She does not know her brother is already dead. She believes he is resting and that you might bring word of him. She gives you the Covenant leadership without fully understanding she is giving you the last fragment of an institution that Sullivan dismantled generations ago, handed over by someone who has been faithfully guarding nothing for a very long time. Okeros tried to create a dragon baby. King Okeros, the consumed king found in a secret garden beneath Lothric Castle, was once the legitimate ruler of Lothric and the father of both sets of the royal twins, Lorien and Lothric, and their younger brother Ocelot. In his obsession with the dragons his kingdom worshipped and the pale-scaled royalty of Seath the Scaleless, Okeros subjected himself to transformation through sorcery, becoming a pale, somewhat draconic creature covered in scales. During his boss fight, he can be heard cradling something invisible and referring to Ocelot, child of dragons, carrying his youngest son, who at some point ceased to exist, disappeared, or was absorbed into whatever experiment Oceros was conducting. He fights you talking to an empty space in his arms, convinced the child is still there. The extent of what was done to Ocelot, the nature of the dragon child experiments, and where Ocelot actually went are never addressed. The game only gives you the king, talking to nothing. The Grand Archives was dipped in wax to protect scholars from cursed books. The Grand Archives of Lothric Castle contains one of the largest collections of knowledge in the known world. It also contains cursed books, whose text can drive a reader mad on contact. The solution the scholars of the Grand Archives arrived at was practical, if grotesque. They dipped their heads in wax before reading, creating a protective coating that prevented the curse from taking hold in their minds. You can do the same thing as a player, dunking your head in one of the large pools of wax found in the area and gaining temporary curse immunity. The scholar enemies roaming the archives with wax-sealed heads are not wearing this as a ceremonial affectation. They are wearing it because the alternative is losing their minds to the contents of their own library. It is one of the small, quietly horrifying bits of institutional logic that Dark Souls 3 scatters through its world. A problem and a solution, implemented so regularly it became routine. Black Hand Gotthard died, trying to escape the Grand Archives. The Grand Archives key, required to enter the Grand Archives, is found on the corpse of Black Hand Gotthard, one of 3 Black Hand assassins who serve as enemies near the top of the building. The Black Hands are elite royal assassins, among the most trusted fighters in Lothric's service, but Gotthard is dead outside the locked door, clutching the key he needed to escape. The 3 living black hands inside the archives attack you immediately and without dialogue. Whatever happened inside the archives, whatever they witnessed in there, turned 3 of the most disciplined assassins in the kingdom against each other or against anyone who approached. Gotthard's body position suggests he was trying to get out, not in. He had the key. He did not make it to the door. The game presents his death as background scenery, a note to find the key on a corpse, and moves on. The 3 still inside have no story attached to why they fight you. They simply do. Carthus was an empire built on conquest and then swallowed by the abyss. The catacombs of Carthus are the remnant of a once vast desert kingdom whose name comes up repeatedly in item descriptions throughout the game. Carthus warriors, burning them with Carthus curved swords, armoring in bone ash, charging through enemies in formations described as lightning fast. Built an empire through pure martial aggression, their curved sword style designed around absolute aggression and momentum. High Lord Wolnir was their king, and he sought to extend even beyond death, stealing divine crowns to maintain his existence. The abyss got him anyway. By the time you walk through the catacombs, what remains of Carthus is skeletons reanimated by hollowing, rolling balls of bone, and a king sitting in total darkness, held together by stolen bracelet light. Terrified of the dark he became. The swords of Carthus warriors, including the Carthus curved sword and the Carthus curved greatsword, are among the fastest weapons in the game. A last echo of an empire that moved faster than anyone could stop until the abyss was faster still. Irina of Karim may become a firekeeper or be consumed. Irina of Karim, a gentle blind woman you can rescue from a cell in the undead settlement, is an embroideress who has been studying miracle tomes. She came to Karim seeking to become a firekeeper, but was locked away before she could complete her journey. Her questline has 2 significantly different outcomes depending on which tomes you give her. If you give her only gentle miracle tomes, she eventually ascends and becomes a true firekeeper. A happy ending by Dark Souls standards. If you give her the dark tomes, the ones that contain the sounds of wailing and forbidden knowledge, she begins to be consumed by them, her dialogue shifting toward distress, and her companion Igon of Karim becomes hostile, determined to take her away from you before whatever is happening to her completes. The miracle tomes from the deep are not simply dark in a thematic sense. Irina, holding them and reading them with her hands, can feel what is inside them. The game gives you the choice of what to put in her hands. Igon of Karim will take Irina back if you harm her. Igon of Karim is a mace-wielding knight with a heavily sardonic view of his occupation, but his devotion to Irina is absolute and genuine. He found her in the undead settlement and remained with her, despite having no obligation to do so, because he made a promise to someone in Karim that she would be protected. If Irina suffers, specifically if you purchase dark, miracle tomes through her, Igon turns hostile, determined to reclaim her and leave. He does not act from cruelty, but from a promise made before you ever arrived. His miracles are obtainable from a statue if he dies, but the items feel almost secondary to the portrait of someone who has decided that one person's well-being is his entire remaining reason to remain coherent in a world full of reasons to hollow. When Irina achieves the good ending, Igon disappears, his purpose completed, his promise kept, his next act unreported by the game, and therefore entirely his own. Smouldering Lake is a hidden world. Beneath the catacombs, by cutting the rope bridge that spans the catacombs of Carthus, turning it into a vertical ladder, you descend into Smouldering Lake, one of the most visually distinctive areas in the game. The lake is lit from below by a field of lava. Enormous petrified trees of ash stand across its surface, and floating embers drift through the air like slow, orange snow. A colossal worm called the sandworm roams the shoreline, and giant crabs move through the volcanic shallows. Below the lake sits the demon ruins, a labyrinth full of dying demons, the remnants of a race that was born from the chaos flame centuries ago and is now, slowly and collectively, going extinct. The old demon king fights you in a room surrounded by the corpses of his kin, a final survivor of a species, and his sole description acknowledges their decline. Smouldering Lake is not simply a secret area. It is an elegy for something ancient, a place where an entire race goes to finish dying, and the ember light makes it beautiful. The demons are a dying race in Dark Souls 3. Demons in the original Dark Souls were a thriving, dangerous force created from the Chaos Flame by the Witch of Izalith in her failed attempt to recreate the first flame. They spread from Izalith across the world. By the time of Dark Souls 3, the Chaos Flame has long since faded, and without it, new demons cannot be born. The population of demons visible in Smouldering Lake and the demon ruins are those that remain, and they are dying. Several demonic corpses are visible in the old Demon King's room. The Black Knights in Demon Ruins are there specifically to hunt demons, fulfilling an ancient duty from Gwyn's age. You encounter only a handful of live demons in the entire game. Some weapon descriptions acknowledge this extinction event directly, noting that certain demon soul weapons were forged from creatures of the old Chaos Flame in an age when such things still existed. The final surviving demons of Dark Souls 3 are living in a lake of fire beneath a canyon, waiting for something that is not going to come back. The two fair ladies from Dark Souls 1 died back home. Behind an illusory wall in the demon ruins of Smouldering Lake lie two corpses. One a bloated spider-shaped form warped by chaos, and one a human body near Quilana's pyromancy tome. These are, according to widespread lore interpretation, the Fair Lady, Quelag's sister, the Chaos Servant goddess who was found in the depths of Blighttown in Dark Souls 1, and Quilana, the only daughter of the Witch of Izalith, to escape the Chaos transformation, who served as the pyromancy teacher in Blighttown. Quilana's item description in the original game notes that she vowed to one day return to Izalith and release her sisters from their suffering. By the time you find the bodies in Smouldering Lake, it appears she kept that promise. She came back to the ruins of her home, to what remained of her family, and died there beside the sister she could not save. Two of the most quietly tragic characters in the original game ended up exactly where they said they were going. Andre has been in Firelink Shrine across every age. Blacksmith Andre is treated as background furniture in Dark Souls 3, a reliable service provider at the heart of Firelink Shrine, who upgrades your weapons and reinforces your Estus. But the lore of the Souls series implies something stranger. Andre of Astora appeared in the original Dark Souls, where he was operating as a blacksmith in a kingdom that existed thousands of years before the events of Dark Souls 3, by the timeline's reckoning. His presence in the third game is either the result of time folding back on itself, the convergence of ages that brings Lothric's geography together from all eras, or Andre is, in some meaningful way, genuinely unkillable. He is the one constant. Kingdoms rise and fall, lords of Cinderburn and Go Hollow Civilizations crash into each other and collapse. And Andre is at his forge, noting that it's all in the technique. Whether this is meaningful or simply from software's way of giving players a familiar face, the effect is the same. In a game about endings, the blacksmith is always still working. The profane flame never goes out. The profane flame, which devastated the profane capital and created the disaster that forced Yhorm to become a Lord of Cinder, is described as an undying flame that came from the sky, descended from above like a celestial punishment, and settled into the earth below the city's foundations. What makes it particularly strange is its specific hunger. It burns only human flesh. Stone, metal, and wood remain untouched, but the people of the profane capital were incinerated. Sullivan, who discovered the flame as a young sorcerer and incorporated it into his profaned greatsword, used it to corrupt the hearts of Irithil's holy knights after seizing power. A flame that specifically hunts humanity being used to destroy the humanity of those who served him. The metaphysical implications are not made explicit, but the profane flame's origin from the sky, its selective destruction, and its indestructibility suggest it is something fundamentally different from the first flame. Perhaps an emanation of the abyss itself. Wearing fire as a disguise, the Road of Sacrifices got its name. Honestly, the swampy stretch between the undead settlement and the Cathedral of the Deep is called the Road of Sacrifices, and the name is literal. It is the pathway along which evangelists of the Church of the Deep transported human victims from the settlement to Aldrich's cathedral. The bog conditions, the ambush enemies, the crucified figures visible on structures throughout the area. These are the remnants of a supply chain. The Crystal Sage boss at the end of the road is a sorcerer closely connected to the Grand Archives who appears to have established themselves on this route at some point, and the crucifixion woods that border the area carry their own weight of history. Enemies called lycanthropes appear here, combining human and wolf forms in ways that evoke the corrupted experiments conducted throughout Lothric on the border between human and beast. Every area in the game's geography has a reason for existing exactly where it does, and the Road of Sacrifices exists because something needed to keep moving people towards something that needed to keep eating them. Irithil is built on Eternal Night, the approach to Irithil of the Boreal Valley. Crossing the bridge at Pontiff's territory and looking up at the frozen city lit by permanent cold blue light is one of the most visually striking moments in the game. The city exists under a sky that never lightens, its architecture a memory of Anor Londo's grandeur rendered in ice and dusk. It was the seat of a genuine divine civilization, dedicated to Gwyndolin's moon and the Dark Moon Covenant, before Sullivan arrived and began his methodical dismantling of everything it was. The citizens who remain are emaciated, hollow figures wandering through frost. Sullivan's beasts haunt the lower districts. The distant cathedral where Aldrich rests glows with the wrongness of something that shouldn't be illuminated. Irithil is a city in the process of becoming a ruin, while still technically standing. Every building intact, every street walkable, and everyone who made it what it was already gone, or transformed into something that no longer remembers their own name. The Silver Knights in Anor Londo were waiting millennia. The Silver Knights encountered in Irithil's Anor Londo section, patrolling the familiar corridors from the original Dark Souls, have been standing watch since before the events of the first game. Their item descriptions note that they served Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, who linked the first flame thousands of years before the timeline of Dark Souls 3. Whether these are the original knights, undead, and continuing their patrol through some combination of hollow endurance and duty, or whether they are a later generation emulating the same role, is not resolved. What is clear is that Anna Londo, the great golden city made of illusion, originally sustained by Gwendolyn's illusion magic, and now operating under whatever Sullivan has replaced that with, still has silver-armored figures walking its rooftops and guarding its staircases. They fire enormous arrows at anyone who crosses the exposed bridge. They have been doing this for so long, they have outlasted every god they once served. The dungeon beneath Irithyll holds experimental horrors. Irithyll Dungeon is one of the most oppressive areas in Dark Souls 3. A prison facility built close to the profaned capital, run by grotesque jailers whose lanterns drain your maximum health with their gaze alone. Sullivan used this prison to hold sorcerers and scholars whose knowledge he wanted extracted or destroyed. Xantau scholars, Vinheim sorcerers, and the pyromancer Kala, who you can rescue from a cell there. The jailers have emaciated, elongated forms that suggest prolonged exposure to something that altered their bodies. One theory holds that the dungeon also housed dragon research, experiments conducted by Okeros and Sullivan into transforming living humans into something resembling the pale dragons that Lothric's royalty venerated. The giant slaves chained in the Cathedral of the Deep and the basilisks lurking in the dungeon's depths are both hints at an experimental program that touched multiple areas. The dungeon is not simply a place to hold prisoners. It is a place to do things to prisoners that require a location no one is supposed to find. The man-grubs are what Rosaria's followers become. The pale, crawling, larval creatures found throughout the Cathedral of the Deep, called man-grubs, are among the most unsettling enemies in the game for reasons that become clear only through item descriptions. Players who use Rosaria's Fingers Covenant can reallocate their attributes up to 5 times per playthrough without consequence. The 6th reallocation transforms them into a hollow grub, losing the ability to act as a human. Rosaria's chamber is full of man-grubs. These were people who came to the mother of rebirth-seeking transformation, who remade themselves past the point of return, who gave up humanity for the promise of endless renewal until the renewal was all that remained. The creatures that guard Rosaria's room are, in the most literal sense possible, the devoted, the ones who loved rebirth so much they became an expression of it, crawling and pale and voiceless in the same chamber as the woman whose gift destroyed them. The Crystal Sage has a twin, who is much weaker. The Crystal Sage boss in the Road of Sacrifices, a sorcerer who teleports across the arena and spawns duplicate phantoms to confuse the player, is one of 2 Crystal Sages. The twin appears later in the Grand Archives, but the Grand Archives version is significantly weaker. Described in item descriptions as the lesser of the 2, the one who struggled to keep pace with its more gifted sibling, the Crystal Sages are connected to the Abyss Watchers through the Sage Ring, a ring they gave to the Legion that, Barheg, shortened spellcasting time. They are ancient sorcerers who devoted themselves to crystal sorceries, an offshoot of Big Hat Logan's work from the first game, and ended up, through some combination of fate and the collapsing timeline, in 2 different places within Lothric's architecture, one guarding a swamp road and one haunting the upper floors of a library. The weaker twin, surrounded by sorcerers it trained, is still a formidable creature. What the stronger one actually was when it was alive and whole is not described. Okeros was obsessed with Saith the Scaleless. King Okeros' obsession with dragons is not a general dragon obsession, but something more specific and more troubling. His equipment descriptions and the available lore both point toward the legacy of Saith the Scaleless. the pale, mad dragon scholar from the original Dark Souls who betrayed his own kind, helped Gwyn kill the everlasting dragons, and was granted the title of Duke and an archive for his immortality research. Seath produced the Moonlight Greatsword and conducted horrifying experiments on kidnapped women in his Duke's archives. Okiros, king of Lothric and scholar of the Grand Archives, appears to have studied Seath's legacy extensively, to the point of attempting to recreate it, to transform himself and possibly his children into pale-scaled beings in Seath's image. The Consume King's Garden, where you fight Okeros, is full of creatures that resemble what such experiments might produce. He wanted to be what Seath was. He transformed himself. He lost his son somewhere in the process. The Sunlight Covenant is a monument to an absent god. The Warriors of Sunlight, the covenant devoted to jolly cooperation, to summoning and being summoned, to raising a fist toward the sun in greeting, is dedicated to Gwyn's firstborn son, whose name has been erased from history. The Altar of Sunlight. In the original Dark Souls depicted a statue of a small figure holding a sword which now sits destroyed. In Dark Souls 3, the Covenant continues in the form of the Warrior of Sunlight item and the gesture, but Gwyn's firstborn, whose statue once served as the Covenant's focal point, is known only as the Nameless King by the time you find him. The Covenant outlasted the god it worshipped, Solaire of Astara from the original game, seeking a son of his own, was unknowingly following in the footsteps of someone whose lineage he could never have confirmed. Some bros across the Souls series have been praising an erased deity for thousands of years, and the deity is sitting alone on a mountain with a dragon, having apparently also been waiting for something. The Firekeeper's eyes are made from a dead Firekeeper. The eyes of a Firekeeper, found in the dark Firelink Shrine of the Untended Graves, are described as having been taken from a Firekeeper who was slain. Firekeepers are mortal servants bound to their bonfire, unable to leave its proximity, existing to tend the fire and serve those who come to it. The fact that this Firekeeper was killed and that her eyes were removed and left behind rather than simply lost with her death implies a deliberate act. Someone took these eyes from a dead keeper and left them in the darkest version of Firelink, either as a warning, a gift, or the remnant of a specific act of violence now buried under ages of decay. The current Firekeeper of Firelink Shrine, when you give her these eyes, describes the vision they carry with quiet terror and says she does not wish to see such things. Something she cannot look at without fear came from the eyes of someone who was killed for seeing it. The Soul of Cinder is every champion who has ever linked the flame, the final boss of Dark Souls. 3's base game, the Soul of Cinder, is not a single entity, but an amalgamation, the combined soul of every being who has ever linked the first flame across all cycles and ages. It wields different movesets in sequence, a dexterity build, a pyromancer's fire, a sorcerer's spells, a cleric's faith miracles, a knight's heavyset weapons. It cycles through playstyle archetypes because each one represents a different champion from a different age who made the same sacrifice. In its second phase, it shifts specifically to Gwyn's moveset, the sword dances, the leaping slashes, the parry-baiting rhythm, making clear that Gwyn himself is contained within it, the original kindler at the core of every subsequent kindling. You are not fighting a monster at the end of Dark Souls 3. You are fighting the entire history of the series compressed into a single form, and the music that plays is Gwyn's theme, arranged as though it remembers what it was. Hawkwood seeks the path of the dragon. Hawkwood, the deserter's personal questline, is about his attempt to become a dragon. having deserted the Abyss Watchers and their wolf blood. Hawkwood seeks an entirely different path of transcendence, the ancient practice of ascending toward dragonhood, shedding the human form in pursuit of scales and immortality. He challenges you specifically for the Dragon Torso Stone and the Dragon Head Stone, items that allow a player to physically transform their body parts into draconic forms. His challenge is not malice but ambition. He wants what you might be using. The fact that the deserter from the Wolfblood Legion ends up attempting to become a dragon has a quiet irony to it. He abandoned a covenant defined by hunting Artorias' dragon-associated enemies and ended up pursuing the covenant of the dragon's greatest friend, the Nameless King. His path from wolf to dragon is the long arc of a man who has simply decided, after everything, to become the strongest thing he can imagine. The Firelink Shrine bell doesn't summon anyone. Dark Souls 3 opens with a cinematic depicting bells tolling across the land to summon the Lords of Cinder back to their thrones. The game's entire premise depends on this summons. But when you arrive at Firelink Shrine, the bell in the tower is unrung. In fact, it cannot be rung without paying the tower key cost, and there is no functional purpose to ringing it other than accessing the crow on the roof. The bells that summon the lords back to their thrones are elsewhere in the world. The bell in Firelink's tower is atmospheric, a detail that rewards the curious player with a crow encounter and a rooftop view. But it is not the bell the game's opening described. Firelink Shrine is already set up, already prepared, already waiting. The Ashen One arrives at a destination that was readied by something else. The bells already rang. You just didn't hear them. Udex Gundyr fought to the last moment. The tutorial boss Udex Gundyr, impaled at the start of the Cemetery of Ash with a coiled sword through his chest, carries a lore tragedy that most players never learn. The soul of Champion Gundyr reveals it plainly. Once, our champion came late to the festivities and was greeted by a shrine without fire and a bell that would not toll. Gundyr was himself an unkindled, someone who rose to link the first flame. But he arrived after the fire had already faded. His firekeeper was dead. There was nothing for him to do. According to the Fextra Life wiki and item descriptions, he was defeated by an unknown warrior after this failure, then made into a sheath for the coiled sword, condemned to serve as the gatekeeper for every subsequent unkindled, testing whether they are worthy to reach the shrine he was never able to kindle. When you pull the coiled sword from his chest, you awaken him, and he does what he was remade to do. He fights. The pus of man corruption that erupts in his second phase suggests that centuries of purposeless stasis, planted in cold ground, left something dark to accumulate in a champion who once had a purpose and outlived it entirely. The Ringed Knights fought the dragons and were given no credit. When Gwyn rallied his forces to war against the everlasting dragons at the dawn of the Age of Fire, the Ringed Knights fought alongside him. Human warriors from the ancient pygmy bloodline who served in the ranks, charging into battle against stone-scaled immortals. The Dragon Head Shield's description makes this explicit. The Ringed Knights stood among those who set out to slay the dragons, but their contributions were never lauded. They were not remembered. They were not honored. The gods took the glory, and the human fighters who had bled alongside them were returned to their city and sealed behind the branded sign of fire that Gwyn placed upon them. The weapons and armor of the Ringed Knights were forged in the abyss itself, the dark that humanity carries. And because the gods recognized that dark heritage, they marked their bodies with fire to suppress it. They were used as weapons, then contained as threats. by the same powers they had helped into their age of divinity. The dark sign was placed on humans by the gods. The dark sign, the mark of the undead curse, the symbol burned onto hollowing flesh, the circular brand that condemns those who bear it to die and return forever, was not a natural consequence of the world's cycle. It was imposed. The ringed night set's description confirms that the gods branded their armor with the seal of fire due to the night's closeness to the dark. The dark sign is a deliberate act of suppression placed by the gods onto those who carried the dark soul to ensure that humanity's power remained contained, that the age of fire continued, and that the human dark soul fed the first flame rather than gathering its own authority. The undead curse, every death and revival, every hollow, every human being who woke up screaming in a graveyard, not knowing why they couldn't stay dead, is a fire the gods lit to keep themselves warm. The entire tragedy of the undead is the consequence of that decision, multiplied across every age and every cycle. Leonhard murdered Rosaria. Out of devotion, ring finger. Leonhard, who greets you in Firelink Shrine with courtly elegance and leads you toward the Rosaria's fingers covenant, eventually murders Rosaria in her own chamber and flees to Anna Londo with her soul. His motivation is not malice, but a form of broken reverence. He carries Rosaria's soul to Guinevere's chamber, the room in the abandoned Anna Londo Cathedral where the Princess of Sunlight once held court. As if returning her to somewhere she belongs, Rosaria is believed by most lore interpretations to be a descendant of Guinevere, possibly even a daughter, and her soul can be transposed into bountiful sunlight, a miracle intimately associated with Guinevere herself. Leonhard's questline mirrors the original Dark Souls Lautrec, who also murdered a firekeeper and fled to Anna Londo with her soul. Both acts of violence were performed by devoted servants who decided, through logic only they could follow, that what they loved had to be stolen away from the world that was corrupting it. Rosaria's firstborn stole her tongue. The item description for Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth, states plainly that she was robbed of her tongue by her firstborn, and that she has been waiting for their return ever since. This single sentence is one of the most disturbing pieces of lore in the game, delivered without context or elaboration. It establishes that Rosaria's silence, her absolute muteness, the fact that the Mother of Rebirth can never speak to anyone who comes to her, is not a divine condition, but a wound. Someone born of her body took the thing that allowed her to communicate, and then left. The man grubs that crowd her chamber, the tongues collected in her name, the entire economy of the Covenant, all of it is her vigil. She waits, surrounded by grubs that were once devoted followers transformed beyond recognition, in a chamber she cannot leave, for a child will not come back. The Covenant that bears her name has people collecting tongues and bringing them to her. She receives every one. Leonhard's questline mirrors Lautrec's from Dark Souls 1. The parallel between Leonhard and Knight Lautrec of Karim from the original Dark Souls is deliberate and structurally exact. Both men are devoted knights who murder a tongueless woman tied to a specific chamber. Both flee to Anor Londo with their victim's soul. Both are invaded and killed by the player in the same general area. Both carry curved swords and wear distinctive headgear. The items associated with their kills yield the miracles of Guinevere. This is not simple recycling. From Software is using the echo to suggest that this pattern repeats, that the same cycle of devotion turned destruction plays out again and again with different names attached to the same roles. Leonhard even uses a shotel, the same weapon type Lautrec favored in the first game. When you invade him in Guinevere's chamber, and he dies with a line of devotion on his lips. You are completing a ritual that was performed once before in a different age, by a different madman, for reasons no less sincere and no less wrong. Orbeck became an assassin, just to learn sorcery. Orbeck of Vinheim's story is an unusual one for a sorcery trainer. He was fascinated by spells, but lacked the academic qualifications to enter the Dragon School of Vinheim legitimately. So he found another way in. He became an assassin, offering his skills as a killer in exchange for admission to the school that had previously turned him away. He did this knowing exactly what it meant, and his dialogue in Firelink Shrine reflects a man who has been carrying the weight of that bargain for a long time. He warns you, at one point, that no matter the victim's stature, every killing has consequences, that he bloodied his hands before he understood this simple truth. After he dies, and his ashes are given to Yuria of Londor, she acknowledges his passing without sentimentality. Orbeck's entire arc is the story of someone who paid too high a price for knowledge, who spent the game finally using the thing that cost him so much, and whose death is as quiet and unremarked as the years of violence that preceded his studies. Orbeck dies in the Grand Archives after teaching you everything. If you bring Orbeck all 4 sorcery scrolls and buy out his entire stock of spells, he eventually takes his leave from Firelink Shrine. He tells you he is done and departs with a kind of satisfaction. A student who has transferred everything he knows and is ready to end the tutoring relationship on his own terms. You can summon him for the Twin Princes fight, and in that context he becomes briefly extraordinary. A former assassin-turned-student showing up at the end to fight one last time. Afterward, his corpse appears in the Grand Archives, seated at a table on the upper floors near the sorcery-obsessed scholars. He chose to die there, in a library, surrounded by the discipline he had killed for, having actually become what he had always wanted to be. He is one of the few NPCs in Dark Souls 3 whose death is not tragedy but conclusion, and the stillness of his seated posture in that candlelit archive suggests someone who sat down with every intention of not getting back up, surrounded by pages. Carla May, be a child of the abyss. The dark arts teacher imprisoned in Irithil Dungeon describes herself as a heretic and accepts her role with dry, cautious composure. But her ashes, acquired if she dies, describe her as a spurned child of the abyss. This places her in the company of Nishandra, Ilana, Nadalia, and Alsana from Dark Souls 2, all of whom were fragments of Manus, the father of the abyss, the first human to be consumed by darkness in the original Ulasil catastrophe. If Carla carries some fragment of that inheritance, it explains both why she was imprisoned in Sullivan's dungeon, a facility used to torture sorcerers and harvest their knowledge, and why she is the only one capable of reading and teaching from the Deep Braille and Londor divine tomes, texts so dark that even willing practitioners recoil from them. There is also a theory connecting her to Alva, Seeker of the Spurned, whose armor appears outside her cell and whose title echoes her own. Whether she is his daughter or someone he simply sought, the game hides the answer and leaves only proximity as evidence. The jailers of Irithil Dungeon can drain your maximum health. The jailers who patrol Irithil Dungeon are among the most mechanically unsettling enemies in the game because their lanterns do something no other enemy can. They permanently reduce your maximum health for the duration of your time in the dungeon. They do not deal standard damage. They simply look at you, and the flame of their lantern diminishes you. The lore around them is sparse, but their elongated, emaciated forms and their positioning as practitioners of Sullivan's extraction program suggest they may have been subjected to the same experiments they administered. The dungeon was used to torture and interrogate sorcerers for knowledge, and the jailers who managed those processes would have been exposed constantly to the psychic residue of pain and corruption. What you find in the dungeon may be the result of that exposure. Guards who became something wrong through prolonged contact with what they were guarding. Their health-draining gaze is less a power than a contagion. The firekeeper can hear the dark in the eyes. When you give the firekeeper the eyes of a firekeeper found in the untended graves, her response is one of the most hauntingly written moments in the game. She says she sees a vision, an age without fire, gentle and cold, lit only by embers and stars, open to something that was never allowed to exist while the flame burned. She's frightened. She says she sees a darkness that would swallow the world whole. But in the same breath, she describes something beautiful. A world after the cycle, free of the obligation to kindle and burn and begin again. She hesitates. She offers to return the eyes if you wish, if you keep them and ask her to act on the vision. Her ending dialogue is among the quietest and most aching in the trilogy. She guides you into a darkness she describes not as destruction, but as a long sleep, a rest that the world has needed for longer than anyone can remember. The game gives her agency in that ending more than any other. She chooses to help you let the fire go out, and her voice when she does it carries no regret. The firekeeper dies in every ending, except one, across Dark Souls. 3's three main endings, only one leaves the firekeeper alive in any meaningful sense. In the Link the Fire ending, she sends you away into the flame and tends the bonfire in isolation. Her existence reduced to maintaining a light you sacrificed yourself to restore. In the Age of Dark ending, she guides the flame toward extinction, and if you kill her during the ending cutscene before she can fully extinguish it, you receive the fourth alternate unkindled ending, a fourth possibility available only through that single act of violence at the most sacred moment. In the Usurpation of Fire ending, she is present in the background of a hollow world, her purpose dissolved by a new order that has no use for keepers of a fire that no longer exists. The firekeeper, who has tended the Firelink across multiple ages, is in the most literal sense defined by a function. And in almost every outcome, the world stops needing what she provides. Her loyalty outlasts the thing she was loyal to. The Unkindled are failed lords of Cinder. The Unkindled, the title given to the player character and others like Henri and Cirrus, are not simply undead wanderers. They are specifically those who attempted to link the first flame, and could not. They burned, yes, but they did not burn brightly enough to accomplish the linking. Their bodies reduced to ash, but their purpose remained unfulfilled. The opening narration of Dark Souls 3 notes that only in truth the lords will abandon their thrones and the unkindled will rise, positioning the unkindled as a contingency, an emergency measure activated when the expected champions fail. Henri's questline explicitly frames them as Unkindled One alongside the player. Frida is described as the first of the Unkindled. They are not heroes. They are the ash left behind by attempts that went wrong, given one more opportunity to try again. Everything the player character does in the game is, in some sense, a second attempt at something that already failed once. Yol of Londor dies. When you take his fifth gift, Yol of Londor, the pilgrim who offers you free levels by drawing out your true strength through dark sigils, is already dying when you meet him. He is found among a field of dead pilgrims, companions who did not survive the journey, and his hollow state is advanced. Each time he draws out your strength, he gives a piece of what he has left. After the fifth and final offering, the timer on what remains of him is essentially spent. He does not die immediately. The game ties his passing to your progress through the world, with his body disappearing once you have advanced far enough through Karthus. But his fifth gift is, in every meaningful sense, the last thing he does. Uriah appears in his place, already knowing what happened and already moving the plan forward. The game does not announce his death. There is no cutscene, no dialogue about it, no moment of acknowledgement. He is simply not there anymore. Yol of Londor travelled from Londor as one of the last survivors of a group whose mission was to find the unkindled and guide them to the usurpation. He gave everything he had to a stranger in increments and died without anyone noticing he had gone. Uriah is one of three sisters of the Sable Church. Uriah of Londor, who arrives in Firelink's shrine after Yol's death and manages the Lord of Hollow's questline, is one of three leaders of the Sable Church of Londor. She is the most prominent in Dark Souls 3. A second appears as the Old Woman of Londor, who manages the Henri wedding ceremony in the Dark Moon tomb. The third is widely interpreted to be the pilgrim disguised as a statue in the Church of Yoshka, tasked with eliminating Henri before the ritual. Though the game presents this third leader more obliquely, and the connection is inferred from context rather than stated outright. If you kill Uriah and loot her ashes, she speaks in her final breath only of Karthus. If you complete her questline and usurp the fire, the ending cutscene shows the Ashen One crowned in darkness, surrounded by hollow worshippers, with Uriah and other Londor figures kneeling in attendance. She has successfully manufactured a Lord. Her entire purpose, crossing to Lothric, serving Yol, guiding Henri's fate, arranging the ritual, was preparation for this single moment. That she kneels in the ending as a servant rather than a ruler is the final expression of her ideology. The Lord of Hollows belongs to everyone who made them. Henri was already hollow when you met them, a detail that players can discover by removing helmets from NPCs reveals that Henri of Astera is already physically hollow beneath the Elite Knight helm from the first moment you encounter them on the Road of Sacrifices. They have the hollowed facial structure, the grey skin, the deteriorating features associated with advanced hollowing. They appear functional, they speak clearly, they travel with purpose. But the outward presentation of a composed knight is maintained over a foundation that has already begun to dissolve. This reframes Henri's entire presence in the game. They are not a person at risk of going hollow. They are a person who is hollow and choosing to behave as if they are not. A distinction the game quietly acknowledges in how their questline ends regardless of which path you take. Even if you protect Henri from the assassin and help them defeat Aldrich, they eventually hollow completely. Sitting by Horace's grave with only a broken sword hilt, no longer able to maintain the pretense. Henri is not actually from Astera. The item description for Henri's straight sword. The weapon left with Ludleth in several questline outcomes. Notes that Astora is a ruined land, and that Henri knows it only by name, having been drawn to the idea of Astora rather than the place itself. The Elite Knight armor set, associated with Astora throughout the series, carries similar notes about a connection to an ideal rather than an origin. Henri of Astora is not from Astora. They chose the name. They chose the identity of a knight from a noble land as a frame around which to build a self that could function. A hollow person who decided to be an Asteran knight, the way you might decide to be brave, naming it until the decision became real enough to act on. The companion they travelled with, Horace, did the same. Neither of them had names until they chose them. What this means for two people who hollowed before reaching their destination and held on anyway is something the game deliberately leaves without resolution. The undead settlement was a processing ground. The undead settlement is where hollows were collected, contained and sorted for various purposes. Some sent to Aldrich's cathedral via the road of sacrifices, some kept in cages for purposes less clearly defined, and some apparently used in the experiments that the evangelists conducted throughout the area. The giant living in a watchtower at the settlement has a different relationship to it than the human population. He throws firebombs at enemies throughout the area, but if you find and carry the young white branch associated with him, a gift exchanged through the crows from Pickle P, he will stop targeting you specifically, recognizing you as a friend. His presence is unexplained. He is simply there, massive and gentle in his way, throwing fire at the same monsters the player is fighting, having made some kind of peace with his position in a place that uses people as raw material. The giant of the settlement was friends with someone once. The giant archer in the undead settlement, who fires at enemies from his watchtower throughout the area, has a questline connection to the young white branch items traded through Pickle P the Crow. His description implies that he once had a close friendship, traditionally interpreted as being with someone from Firelink or a previous journey, and that the white branch serves as a token of that connection, a way of identifying you as not an enemy. If you carry the branch, he will not fire on you. There is something profoundly quiet about this. A giant who has been stationed in a place full of tragedy and abuse, who continues to aim at the creatures that harm the vulnerable, and who will spare anyone who proves they knew the same person he once cared about. He has no questline of his own. He just sits there firing, remembering someone, and occasionally not killing you. The Dreg Heap is every age falling at once. The opening area of the Ringed City DLC is called the Dreg Heap, and it is exactly what the name suggests. The accumulated residue of every age and world collapsed into a single geographic location at the end of time. The earthen peak from Dark Souls 2 is embedded in the landscape. Structures from multiple eras protrude from the debris. The geometry makes no sense by any conventional cartography. When Filianor's egg is broken, the game sends you to this place, and what you see is the final convergence. All the lands and times the series has traced across 3 games compressed into a heap at the edge of existence. It is not a dungeon, it is a diagram. From Software built the Dreg Heap as a visual argument for what all their lore had been building toward. The idea that the cycle of ages doesn't end cleanly, that the things left behind by dying worlds don't disappear. They just fall into each other and accumulate at the bottom of everything. Slave Knight Gale was the lowest class of warrior. Before he became the final boss of an entire trilogy, Slave Knight Gale was a slave knight, the lowest tier of warrior in Lothric's military hierarchy, sent ahead into dangerous areas specifically because they were considered expendable. They were used to absorb ambushes, trigger traps, clear the way for proper knights who followed behind. Gale's red cape, whose description notes that it has been worn for so long it has become faded and torn from dragging across the ground, suggests a man who has been travelling for an incomprehensibly long time. He appears first in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC as someone guiding the player toward the painted world, with the simple stated goal of finding blood for his niece to paint with. the distance between a slave knight sent ahead of an army and a figure standing at the end of time, carrying within himself the concentrated essence of all humanity, is the entire distance the law travels. And Gale walked every step of it. Gale's red cape has been dragging since before you were alive. Gale's cape, described in its item entry as something worn so long that its original colour has faded, is made from cloth that has travelled across multiple ages of the world. The description of the slave knight set, including that cape, speaks of an old tale that once told of a knight of Ferren long since fallen. His equipment predates him by any normal measure of time. He wore it into an age where it had already been historical, and kept wearing it past the end of history itself. When you encounter him in the Ring City at the final boss arena, he is enormous and barely coherent, wrapped in the shredded remnants of that cape, bellowing in a voice that has lost all its sentences. The cape he still wears is the last visible connection between the slave knight, who set out with a purpose, and the creature that purpose transformed him into. He kept the cape. He let everything else go. The painter's world will be different from all previous ones. Every painted world in the series, Ariamis, Ariandel, has been created according to the same aesthetic: cold, white, grey, a world of frost and preservation modelled on the same template of refuge from the fire. The young painter in Ariandel does something no previous painter has done. She asks specifically for the Dark Soul's blood, the concentrated pigment of human darkness, as her medium. When Gale delivers it and she begins to paint, her description of what she wants to create is warm, explicitly warm, with words specifically associated with sunlight and heat rather than cold. She is painting a world that is neither the age of fire's gold nor the painted world's frost, but something genuinely new. Whether it will work, whether such a world can exist or sustain itself, whether the Dark Soul's blood is enough to paint an age that hasn't been tried yet. None of these questions are answered. She starts painting. That is where the series ends. Shira is the last guardian of Filianor. In the Ringed City DLC, you can find Shira, described as a knight of Filianore, who provides a quest to slay Midir, the dragon corrupted by the Abyss, who has been stationed as guardian of the path to Princess Filianore. Shira is the last surviving member of Filianor's personal guard, maintaining her post at the edge of the world. If you return to her after waking Filianore and transporting to the end of time, she will invade your world as a hostile phantom. Not because you are an enemy, but because you woke what she was sworn to keep asleep. She has no malice. She has a duty, and you violated it by touching the egg, and the duty demands a response even at the end of everything. Shira's invasion after the world ends is one of the most elegantly designed moments in the DLC. A soldier fulfilling an obligation in a world that no longer exists, because the obligation was the only thing she was, and she cannot stop being it simply because the world ended. Midir was sent to guard Filianore, out of loyalty to Gwyn. The Dark Eater Midir, the enormous dragon guarding the approach to Filianore's church, was raised from birth by the gods specifically to fight the Abyss. His soul description states that Midir was bequeathed a duty to eternally battle the Abyss, a duty he would carry out faithfully long after the gods themselves had left. At the time of the game, Midir has been consumed by the Abyss to a significant degree. His scales have darkened, his breath has shifted, and the corruption he was meant to fight has taken root inside him. He has not abandoned his post. He is still fighting, still guarding the path to Filianore. still trying to fulfill his function even as the thing he battles has colonized his body. The tragedy of Midir is a loyalty so total it became self-destruction. He kept the abyss at bay by absorbing it. He is faithful and corrupted simultaneously, and neither condition cancels the other. When you kill him, you are ending a vigil that has lasted since the age of gods. The Pygmy Lords were the original royalty of the Ring City. At the far reaches of the Ring City, past Gale's Arena and deeper into the ash fields at the end of time, you can find the Pygmy Lords, small, withered figures who are the descendants of the furtive Pygmy, the original bearer of the Dark Soul. They were the rulers of the Ring City, its original royal lineage. By the time the Ashen One reaches them, most have gone hollow. Most are sitting in thrones in ruins. Most are barely coherent. One of them invades as a phantom, a ringed city hollow who still carries enough self to oppose you. Their existence represents the full arc of what happened to humanity under the age of gods. Given a city as a gift that was also a prison, granted divine blessings that were also chains, they aged through countless cycles until their bloodline was reduced to these hollow silhouettes in the ash. The first humans, the smallest souls, contained by the gods all the way to the end. The locust preachers in the Ring City preach nihilism. Small, locust-like creatures wander the streets of the Ring City, speaking impatient, inviting voices about the peace of ending. They encourage the Ashen One to give up, to rest, to accept that the age of fire is over and that lingering is futile. Their calm sermons are delivered without malice. They are not enemy soldiers trying to deter you. They genuinely believe what they say, that continuing is unnecessary, that laying down is the natural and correct response to a world this far gone. The Millwood Knight helm found in the ashes of Arundel DLC describes soldiers who were instructed in the same philosophy by a similar presence. The locust preachers are, in their own way, merciful, or at least they believe they are. They want you to stop suffering. They do not understand that the suffering is the point for those who carry a purpose forward, which is why they keep preaching even as you walk past them, to do the thing they want you not to do. Lap in the DLC is not who he appears to be. Lap, a friendly amnesiac knight you encounter in the Ringed City, who asks for your help recovering memories he has lost to hollowing, is Patches. The revelation comes gradually. He remembers loving treasure he has Patches build, and by the end of his quest line, he recovers his memories completely, reverts to his vendor persona in Firelink Shrine, and speaks of the Ringed City with the quiet satisfaction of someone who found exactly what they came for. What he came for was the Titanite slab that sits in the deep swamp of the Dreg Heap, which he sends you to retrieve on his behalf once he has the information he needs. He then completes his own retrieval independently. Lap and Patches are the same person, and the warmth you extend to the amnesiac knight is the warmth you would never extend to the confirmed schemer. Patches uses his hollow-induced amnesia, whether genuine or performed, as a tool for getting what he wants, because that is what Patches always does. Even at the end of the world, he is running a con. There are 3 endings and only one is truly hopeful. Dark Souls 3 has 3 primary endings. The Link the Fire ending restores the first flame, but continues the cycle. The Age of Fire persists, another champion burns, the world resets. The End of Fire ending allows the flame to go out, and the Firekeeper leads the world into a cold darkness that may be freedom or extinction, depending on how you read it. The Usurpation of Fire ending sees the Ashen One absorb the flame and become the Lord of Hollows. crowning an age of hollows with Kathi's design finally fulfilled. The age of dark ending, guided by a firekeeper who sees something hopeful in the dark, is the only one that contains a note of genuine, quiet possibility. She speaks of gentle stars and a world that was tired and needed to rest. Whether that rest is peace or death is deliberately unclear. From Software ends the series on a choice between continuation, usurpation, and the one ending where someone who has served for ages is allowed to say, "I think this might be okay. Let us try." The champion's gravetender protects a dream. The champion's gravetender and gravetender Great Wolf, found in the painted world of Ariandel, guard the grave of a champion who is never identified. Their entire purpose is to protect something that the game never reveals the nature of. The Great Wolf fights alongside the gravetender, suggesting the same relationship Artorias had with Sif, a knight and a wolf defending a burial site, a covenant formed around a shared grave. The champion interred there is implied by the equipment nearby to be someone from the old Wolf of Farron's lineage, or a figure associated with the wolf blood tradition. But the game gives you no name, no context, no explanation. They just fight you to protect a grave in a painted world. The fact that someone, or something, considered this grave worth protecting enough to station guardians in a world that is slowly rotting to pieces is its own form of law. Not everything that matters gets explained, and not every story ends with the listener understanding what they witnessed. The painted world of Ariandel's rot was supposed to come. The rot consuming the painted world of Ariandel is not a catastrophe or a failure of maintenance. It is the natural process. Painted worlds rot on a cycle, and when they reach full decay, they are supposed to be burned by Father Ariandel, as was tradition, so that a new painting can be created. Sister Frida, when she arrived in the world, persuaded Father Ariandel to stop the burning and preserve the painting as it was. She wanted the rot to stop, to hold the world still, to prevent the flame from demanding anything more of a world that had been through enough. The rot continued regardless, because it always does. By the time the Ashen One arrives, the world is deeply compromised. When you fight Frida and Ariandel for the third time and finally end them, Father Ariandel smashes his bowl and sets the world alight. The burning was going to happen eventually. Frida only delayed it. All her ferocity, all her three-phase resistance, bought the world a reprieve from an ending that the ending required to become a beginning. Corvian settlers can be found mourning in Ariandel. Among the Corvian enemies of the painted world, there are scattered Corvian settlers, crow-feathered people who are not immediately hostile, who crouch near fires and speak to you if approached. Their dialogue reflects resignation and confusion. Some of them speak about watching the world rot with a sense of helpless familiarity. Unlike their violent kin, they have chosen to simply remain, tending small fires in a collapsing world, neither fighting what they can't stop, nor pretending it isn't happening. They worship Velka, the goddess of sin, and in the painted world, that worship has meant waiting for a divine judgment that may never come. The Corvian settlers are what devotion looks like when the deity it is directed toward offers no comfort, and the world it lives in is falling apart. They sit by fires in rot, and they talk to strangers, and they stay. Guinevere may have become the Queen of Lothric, one of the most widely discussed identity questions in Dark Souls. 3 concerns the Queen of Lothric, the mysterious woman who married King Okeiros, bore his children, and quietly disappeared after Okelota's birth. The divine blessing in Dark Souls 3 is blessed by the Queen of Lothric, and its description says she was revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty, exactly the role Guinevere holds in the original Dark Souls, where the same item is described as holy water from goddess Guinevere herself. The connection is hard to dismiss. The same item, the same function, the same domain of fertility and bounty, the same eventual disappearance. The Sun Princess ring notes that Guinevere left Anor Londo, became a wife, and bore many heavenly children. And the Dancer of the Boreal Valley and Rosaria are both strongly implied to carry her bloodline through Irithil's royal family. The most coherent reading, shared by many lore researchers, places Guinevere in Lothric as its queen before the game begins. It should be noted the Japanese text is slightly more ambiguous, saying she was compared to a goddess rather than being one outright, which is why the debate persists. But taken together, the evidence suggests strongly that the goddess of sunlight eventually traded her divine station for the role of a queen, bore children destined to carry an impossible burden, and then disappeared as quietly as she had always moved when the age demanded it. Lothric Castle's 3 pillars were knight, scholar, and priestess. The organizing principle of Lothric civilization is outlined in the Knight's Ring, Scholar's Ring, and Priestess's Ring, which state that Lothric was governed by 3 pillars of the king's rule: the knight, the scholar, and the priestess. The knight represents military power and the dragon-taming tradition. The scholar represents the grand archives, the cultivation of knowledge, the sorceress lineage. The priestess represents the religious authority and the blessing lineage that the royal family carried from Guinevere's descendants. All 3 are present in the boss encounters and architecture of Lothric Castle. The door before the twin princes depicts the 3 pillars in relief, but by the time the Ashen One climbs toward the throne, all 3 institutions are in ruins. The knights are hollow, the scholars wax their heads in fear of their own library, and the priestess Emma lies dead at the foot of the high altar. The 3 pillars of a kingdom are its funeral markers by the time you arrive to inherit it. Emma's death triggers the dancer fight early. High Priestess Emma of Lothric Castle, who gives you the small doll and urges you onward, is an optional target for early attack. And if you kill her before completing the 4 lords, the Dancer of the Boreal Valley is summoned immediately, and you face her long before the intended point. This is one of the game's few acknowledgements of completely player-directed disruption of the intended narrative sequence. Emma holds the key to Lothric Castle's second half, and she holds it specifically because the story needs you to do things in a certain order. Killing her shortcuts the sequence at enormous personal risk. The Dancer is one of the hardest early fights in the game, and the game doesn't block you from doing it. It simply makes the consequences immediate and severe. Emma dies believing she has passed her charge to you. She dies as the beginning of an encounter she did not intend to summon. Her last gesture of trust triggers the arrival of a boss she never sees. The Dragon Slayer armor fights without a pilot. The Dragon Slayer armor, a mandatory boss in Lothric Castle, is empty. There is no one inside it. The armor was created for a great warrior, associated by design and context with Dragon Slayer Ornstein's lineage and the ancient dragon slaying tradition. And at some point the warrior inside died or simply departed, but the armor kept fighting. Item descriptions note that it is guided by the will of the dragon-slaying god, suggesting the Nameless King's lingering divine authority animates it even in absence. This means you are fighting an act of will wearing metal, a devotion that outlasted its practitioner, an ideology expressed as plate steel, still guarding a castle it has no personal stake in, because the god whose purpose shaped it told it to guard, and the order never ended. Killing it yields a cinder of a lord that grants access to the archives. The armor falls. The will that moved it does not go anywhere visible. It simply stops having a body to use. Gertrude was a heavenly daughter who heard angels. Mother Gertrude, referenced in the description of the divine Pillars of Light miracle, was the heavenly daughter of a celestial lineage who heard the voice of angels and received angelic magic. She is not present in the game in any physical form. She is a name in a miracle description, a figure who exists only as the origin point of the wing-armored winged knights that guard the grand archives and Lothric Castle. Those knights devoted themselves to Gertrude's faith, and their transformation into the enormous, feathered, axe-wielding creatures you encounter is the result of that devotion reshaping them. The Corvians transform through faith in Velka, the winged knights through faith in Gertrude. The game treats faith as physically transformative when it is strong enough, which raises the question of what Gertrude herself became, if her followers turned into angels, and where she went after the transformation completed. The miracle she left behind can shatter the ground. She is gone. What happened to her is between her and the thing she heard. High Wall of Lothric contains the pus of man. The pus of man, the black, writhing, abyss-infected growth that erupts from hollow corpses throughout the High Wall of Lothric, is the most visible manifestation of the Dark Soul's tendency to overflow when it is concentrated enough. These creatures burst from bodies that have been dead long enough for the dark within them to accumulate and animate. Their presence at the very first area of the game is not simply for difficulty. It establishes immediately that humanity's darkness is not a threat that comes later. It is already here, already erupting from the bodies of the first enemies you encounter, already part of the landscape before you reach any of the Lords of Cinder or the great conspiracies below. The pools of man is what the cycle produces at its endpoint. Human flesh so saturated with accumulated death that what remains is no longer human and can't be contained by the shape it inhabited. It is the series' original monster, still multiplying in the first building. The crow on Firelink's roof trades in remembrance. Pickle Pea, Pumper Rum Crow, the invisible trading bird who inhabits the nest on Firelink Shrine's rooftop, continues a tradition from all three games in the series of an unseen crow who accepts unusual items and returns unexpected things. What the crow gives and takes in Dark Souls 3 includes some of the most emotionally resonant trades in the game. A die, Prism Stone yields a twinkling titanite, a homeward bone yields a call-over gesture, and a Loretta's bone, Greyrat's most precious possession, the remains of someone he loved, can be traded away for a ring of sacrifice. The crow takes things that carry emotional weight and returns things that are technically useful. Whether this means anything about the crow's nature, whether it understands what it is holding, is never stated. The crow's names are onomatopoeia for drum and fife, the sounds of music made from instrument and breath. Wherever the music comes from, something is listening, and it trades in grief. Pickle Pea is the third crow. Across the trilogy, the trading crow of Dark Souls 3 is the third iteration of an unseen bird who accepts unusual items in exchange for useful goods. The first appeared in Demon Souls as the crow, who carried the protagonist to the Nexus and accepted trade items. The second was Snuggly the crow of the original Dark Souls, who built a nest near the northern undead asylum. Pickle Pea continues this lineage as the game's way of acknowledging that some things persist across ages and worlds, when almost nothing else does. The crow in Demon Souls carried the player into the story. The crow in Dark Souls took you out of the starting area. The crow in Dark Souls 3 sits on the roof of Firelink Shrine and waits. Across 3 games and 3 souls in the names, the crow has been where the story begins and where it returns to when the player climbs high enough. What the crow is, whether it is always the same crow, is one of the series' small unanswered warmths in a lore largely built from cold. Miracles in Dark Souls are actually stories told as prayer. The mechanics of how miracles work in the Dark Souls universe is explained in the description of the original heal miracle. To cast a miracle, the caster learns a tale of the gods and says a prayer to be blessed by its revelations. Miracles are not spells in the conventional sense. They are narratives. The caster does not manipulate magical energy. They tell a story, specifically and correctly, and in doing so invoke the events of that story into the present. When Aldrich uses the Life Hunt Scythe, he is not simply generating a weapon. He is telling, through his dream-consumed understanding, the tale of Priscilla and what her scythe could do. When a cleric heals, they are recounting the tale of divine restoration and asking to be blessed by it. This means every miracle in the game is a reference. Every miracle cast in combat is a story being invoked, and the strongest miracles are the most compelling stories, told with enough conviction that the world responds as if they are happening again. The old wolf of Farron may be Sif's descendant. The emaciated grey wolf who rests in a chamber high above Farron Keep, overseeing the watchdogs of Farron Covenant, has been theorized for years to be connected to Sif, the great grey wolf of the original Dark Souls who guarded Artorias' grave. The old wolf appears to be dying, motionless, ancient, unable to be interacted with in any conventional sense. It sits near what functions as a memorial to Artorias, guarding sleeping warriors in the same way Sif guarded the grave of the knight she loved. Sif died in Dark Souls 1, killed in the arena above Artorias' burial site. If the old wolf is Sif's descendant rather than Sif herself, it suggests a lineage of loyalty stretching across ages. A wolf whose ancestor died for a knight, whose descendants kept the vigil anyway, passing down a guardian's purpose through generations until a grey wolf too old to fight was still sitting near the grave because the alternative was unthinkable. Hawkwood's transformation into dragon ends. His arc fully, when you defeat Hawkwood in his optional duel for the Dragon Torso Stone, and when he subsequently succeeds in his quest to become a dragon. His arc concludes as one of the few in the game where a character actually achieves what they set out to do. He deserted a purpose he believed in, spent the game in Firelink Shrine making sardonic remarks about everyone else's quests, challenged you when he finally found something to want, and then became it. The deserter became something that cannot hollow, that does not need purpose, that simply is. Whether this constitutes a happy ending in any recognizable sense is genuinely unclear. He chose to leave behind his humanity for a kind of permanence that removes the conditions under which he might have been broken again. It is, in its way, the most complete resolution any NPC receives. The man who walked away from the wolf blood walked into something else and kept walking until there was no more human left to walk away. The coiled sword fragment connects all bonfires. The coiled sword fragment, one of the rare items used to return to the last bonfire rested at without consuming a homeward bone, is described as containing the essence of a coiled sword. The same coiled sword embedded in Iudex Gundir's chest that the Ashen One pulls out to begin the game. In the lore of the Soul series, the coiled sword is inseparable from the concept of the bonfire itself, containing within it the principle of fire linking in miniature. The fact that a fragment of this object can teleport the player back across the world to the last place they rested suggests that all bonfires are, in some sense, the same bonfire, that the warmth lit at one location is continuous with the warmth lit at another, that resting at a bonfire and being returned by the fragment are both movements within the same network. The coiled sword is both key and connection. It is what starts the game and what holds the world's fire together in the space between its first ember and its last. Dark Souls 3 takes place in a different world than Dark Souls 1. Despite sharing geography, Anor Londo, the Catacombs, Firelink Shrine, Dark Souls 3 does not take place in Lordran, the setting of the original game. It takes place in Lothric, and the relationship between the two lands is one of convergence rather than continuity. The worlds of the Soul series are described as cycling and collapsing toward each other at the end of each age, so the geography of one age approximates the geography of a previous one without being identical. Anor Londo in Lothric occupies roughly the same position as Anor Londo in Lordran, but is not the same building in the same world. This is most clearly indicated by the Dreg Heap, which contains architecture from multiple games and ages converging in one space. The visual proof that the cycle has been ongoing long enough that the worlds are beginning to share the same ash. Dark Souls 3 is set at the moment when every previous iteration of the world is close enough to feel familiar, but far enough gone to be unrecognizable. The Ashen One is called Unkindled because they are made of ash. The title given to the player character, Unkindled, refers to the fact that their previous attempt to link the fire left them as ash rather than fully consuming them as fuel. Ash is what remains when burning is incomplete. The Unkindled are therefore the failed residue of attempts to do the one thing the world needed, animated and sent back to try again. This has an implication for every action you take in the game. Every sword swing, every bonfire rested at, every Lord of Cinder defeated is the act of someone who has already been reduced to their essential material and reformed from it. The Ashen One is the most literal possible expression of the Soul series' central metaphor. You keep trying, and you fail, and you burn, and you rise from what's left. The difference between the Ashen One and the other undead is not that they are stronger or more chosen. It is that they are specifically made of a previous failure, which gives the failure a second shape. Every bonfire is kindled with human bones. The bonfires of Dark Souls 3 are fed with undead bone shards, pieces of undead bodies that, when fed to a bonfire, increase its intensity and allow the Estus flask to hold more healing. This means that the act of upgrading your healing capacity is literally the act of burning pieces of undead humans in the fire you rest at. The bonfires of the Soul series have always required something of the people who lit them, and in Dark Souls 3, that requirement is physical. The fire eats the dead to grow. The undead bone shards scattered throughout the world are not incidentally placed. They are the remains of specific people who made their way through the world before you, who died in specific places, and whose bones retained enough spiritual substance to fuel a fire. You collect them, you burn them. The fire grows warm enough to hold more of its light. Every Estus flask upgrade is a cremation you performed on purpose. Firelink Shrine is connected to the first flame directly. Firelink Shrine is not simply a hub area. It is architecturally and spiritually connected to the kiln of the first flame, which is accessible through a fog door at the end of the game's final area. The shrine exists as a space somehow adjacent to the first flame's location, which is why the Firekeeper can receive the Ashen One and facilitate their journey toward it. The bonfires of Firelink and the First Flame are part of the same network. When the Ashen One finally reaches the kiln and faces the Soul of Cinder, they have travelled from the furthest end of the shrine's network back to its source, the circular structure of the journey, waking in a graveyard connected to the shrine, leaving through bonfires that extend from it, returning to light the flame that powers them all, is the visual shape of the cycle made literal in the level design. You walk a circle. The circle leads back to where you started. That is not accidental. That is what cycles do. The Soul of Cinder uses every weapon class in sequence. The Soul of Cinder does not simply fight with one moveset or weapon. It cycles. In its first phase, it transitions between a curved sword stance, a pyromancer's flame, a catalyst, a greatbow stance, and a heavy weapon stance. Each one a different approach, a different philosophy of combat, a different champion's memory. Then, in its second phase, it abandons all of them and settles into Gwyn's specific moveset, the sword dances and leaping slashes of the Lord of Sunlight himself. The practical implication is that you cannot predict its next form, cannot learn its rhythm as you would a normal boss. The metaphysical implication is that every previous champion's technique is still alive inside the Soul of Cinder. Every chosen one and Lord of Cinder who ever faced the flame is present in the thing guarding it. And at the core of all of them, unchanged across every age, is Gwyn. He was first. He is still there. The cycle keeps, generating new champions and absorbing them into the same fire he lit at the beginning. Dark Souls 3's music contains the entire trilogy. The Soul of Cinder's theme incorporates Gwyn's theme from Dark Souls 1 as its central melody in the second phase. The Nameless King's theme incorporates elements of his father's theme. The Soul of Cinder's first phase music incorporates fragments of melodic material associated with the linking of fire across all three games. The Ringed City plays themes associated with the world's ending that echo lore motifs from the entire series. Composer Yuka Kitamura and the From Software music team treated the score of Dark Souls 3 as a genuine culmination, not simply a conclusion to the third game but a synthesis of all three, using musical quotation and development the way a novelist might use callback and resolution. Every significant musical moment in Dark Souls 3 is, at its deepest layer, a memory of something that played in a previous game, transformed by time and tragedy into something that aches with familiarity, while sounding entirely like what it has become. The music knows the whole story. It has been waiting to play all of it at once. Uria's sister was Elfrida. One of Yuria of Londor's most startling pieces of dialogue occurs when she hands you a soul upon completion of the Usurpation of Fire ending and asks you to take it as nourishment for your lordship, because it is the soul of her sister. That sister is Elfrida. Elfrida, the first of the Unkindled, guardian of the painted world of Ariandel. The silent woman who asked Father Ariandel not to burn the world and then fought you 3 times in a single encounter to keep you from lighting it, was Uria's blood. She was a Londor undead who abandoned the cause. Yuria describes her as a poor wench turned to ash who would abandon Londor. The coldness in that description, and the act of offering her soul as fuel, is the final note in Yuria's character, a woman so committed to Carter's purpose that her sister's desertion registers not as grief, but as waste, and the soul of that sister is simply a resource to be allocated toward the mission. Elfrida fought you to her last breath to protect a world of frost. Her sister handed her soul to a lord she manufactured. The game's true final image, is a child with a paintbrush. Dark Souls 3 concludes, in every ending, in one sense or another, with an image of the world ending or transforming. But the true last creative act in the entire trilogy, following the Age of Dark ending and Slave Knight Gale's defeat, is a girl with a paintbrush. She sits in what remains of the painted world. She has the blood of the Dark Soul. She begins to paint. The camera lingers on this beginning rather than on any ending, and the music that accompanies it is warm rather than elegiac. After 3 games about cycles of fire and sacrifice, after every Lord of Cinder and every ancient god and every tragedy embedded in item descriptions left for players to find, the last thing the series shows you is creation. Someone making something new. A child who was told the world was ending and decided to paint the next one instead. The game offers this not as triumph or resolution, but as an answer to its own long question. What happens after the fire finally goes out? Someone lights a different kind of warmth. Someone always does. The Ashes of Ariandel DLC was hiding a second painted world boss. Within the painted world of Ariandel, there is a hidden area called the Depths of the Painting, a secret space accessible through a cave near the Champion's Grave Tender boss arena. This area contains unique enemies and environmental details that expand the world of the painting beyond its visible surface. The depths suggest that the painted world of Ariandel has literal depth, that what appears to be a bounded canvas is actually a complete world with interior geography, caves, and spaces that extend further than the painting's visible edges. This is consistent with the Souls lore of painted worlds as self-contained realities rather than flat images, something that exists fully 3-dimensionally despite having been created as art. The painting contains within it the full logic of a world, including the parts of a world that are usually kept underground and out of sight, the roots and hollows beneath the surface that give the visible landscape its shape. The Millwood Knights were refugees who brought destruction. The Millwood Knights, found in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC within the snowy forest areas of the painted world, travelled from a distant land after their homeland was consumed by the abyss. Their equipment descriptions speak of a company that fled catastrophe, carrying with them knowledge of how to fight the abyss and weapons designed for that purpose. They brought their war training with them into the painted world, setting up their camp in the frozen forest and their presence in the painting. Soldiers from a world that was destroyed by the very darkness the ringed city was built to contain, adds another layer to the painted world, as a place that collects the broken and the displaced. They did not conquer the forest. They retreated into it. The Millwood Knights are the remnant of a military force that faced extinction and found refuge in a place that was itself slowly dying, which is perhaps the only refuge a force like theirs could find. Longfinger Kirk returns from Dark Souls 1. Longfinger Kirk, the persistent invader from the original Dark Souls who harassed players in Blighttown and Demon Ruins while wearing the distinctive spiked armor, appears in Dark Souls 3 as an invader in the Cathedral of the Deep. His presence is both a deliberate fan callback and a lore detail worth sitting with. Kirk devoted himself to the Fair Lady, the Chaos Servant goddess in Blighttown, and spent the original game bringing her humanity in the form of sacrificial victims. By Dark Souls 3's timeline, the Fair Lady's corpse appears to be one of the 2 bodies found behind the illusory wall in Smouldering Lake. Whether this is the same Kirk or another devotee inspired by his legend is a question the game leaves open. The cycles of the series muddy such identities, but the implication most players draw, and which the equipment design seems to encourage, is that some version of Kirk has been lingering near the cathedral's darkness for a very long time, still in his spiked armor, still invading, still operating according to a devotion whose object no longer exists, loyalty without a recipient, aggression without a purpose, still doing what he was doing because no one told him to stop. Creighton the Wanderer has been chasing mild-mannered Pate. Creighton the Wanderer, who invades you in Erithil and is armored in the distinctive mirror chain set, has a history with a figure from Dark Souls 2. Mild-mannered Pate, who, in the previous game, was a conversational companion with suspicious tendencies towards setting up traps for the bearer of the curse. Creighton and Pate knew each other in Drangleic, and whatever happened between them left Creighton with a vendetta that apparently followed him across ages. The DS3 wiki notes that item descriptions confirm this is the same Creighton from Dark Souls 2. His questline in Dark Souls 3 puts him on a path of revenge that intersects with Cyrus's questline, and completing both results in Creighton's death, the end of a grudge that had been carried too long. He is originally from Mirror, a land of knights defined by warfare, but it was his time in Drangleic alongside Pate that broke something in him permanently. His entire presence in Dark Souls 3 is the consequence of a betrayal that began in a different game, and the world of Lothric is simply where his rage finally ran out of road. The Painted World Painter has no name. The young girl who sits in the tower in the painted world of Ariandel, the one who asks Gale to find the pigment so she can paint a new world, is never named in any item description, dialogue line, or environmental detail. She is simply the painter. The entire engine of the Ringed City DLC, Gale's journey, his transformation, the final boss fight at the end of time, all of it was set in motion by a girl with no name who wanted to make something. Gale calls her his niece, which means they had a relationship that predates the DLC's events and which is never explored. She describes what she wants to paint in terms of warmth and color, specific and deliberate. She has thought carefully about what the next world should contain. She does not know exactly what Gale went to do to get her the blood she needed. She begins painting when he returns. The name she gives to the world she paints will be chosen by someone who isn't her. She's already working on the first brushstroke. The High Wall of Lothric shows a kingdom in free fall. The very first area of the game, the High Wall of Lothric, the steep, fog-shrouded ramparts above Lothric Castle, is already in visible collapse when the Ashen One arrives. The Lothric Knights are hollow or corrupted. The barricades have been broken. The interior hallways are filled with the pus of man erupting from corpses, and the tower on the wall bonfire sits in a building that is actively occupied by enemies who should not be there if the kingdom were functioning. The High Wall was designed as the last line of defense for the kingdom's upper reaches, and it has already fallen. Every fight through it is a tour of a military perimeter that stopped holding while you were still Ash. The Herald Emma, who greets you inside the castle and urges you toward the Lords, is herself already dying. Managing the end of a kingdom's order with the serenity of someone who has accepted that the management of endings is all that remains of her function. Lothric was in free fall before you woke. The Unkindled Rising is described as a last resort. The opening narration of Dark Souls 3 specifies the conditions for the Unkindled to rise. Only in truth the Lords will abandon their thrones, it says, and the Unkindled will rise. The phrasing implies that the Unkindled are a contingency, a secondary measure that only activates when the primary mechanism has failed. The primary mechanism was the 5 Lords of Cinder, returning voluntarily to their thrones and relinking the flame. They did not. The bell tolled, and they abandoned their posts. And so, the unkindled were awakened from their ash as a last resort. This means the player character is not a chosen one in any triumphant sense. They are what gets tried when everything else has already failed. Their awakening is the alarm going off, because no one is coming to prevent the fire from going out. The entire game is, structurally, the emergency response to a situation that the intended safeguards could not handle. You wake up because nothing else worked. The Arithilian-born bear, a mark of the old gods. During character creation in Dark Souls 3, choosing the Arithilian face preset comes with a description. The features of the old gods, as if from legend. They say children born like this are fated to be taken to the Boreal Valley. This is a quiet piece of world building embedded in the cosmetic customization screen. Irithil was the seat of the old royal family descended from Gwyn's line, and children born with the specific facial features associated with that bloodline were not simply admired, they were collected. Taken to the Boreal Valley, what was done to them there is never stated. Given that Irithil is the city Sullivan hollowed out and filled with his own designs, and given that his dungeon below it was used for experiments, the fate of children bearing the god's features in that context carries a weight the game never fully articulates. It leaves the detail in a character creation menu, as if it is simply aesthetic information, and allows the player to decide whether to pursue what it implies. Wolf Knight's greatsword is Artorias' soul-made weapon, the Wolf Knight's greatsword, obtained by transposing the soul of the blood of the wolf from the Abyss Watchers, is described as belonging to the knight tainted by the dark of the Abyss, who was master of the wolf's blood, Artorias himself. The item description notes that the Wolf Knight was the first Abyss Watcher, and this weapon is more punishing against creations of the Abyss. Obtaining this weapon by defeating the Abyss Watchers means you are pulling Artorias' soul out of the collective body of the legion he inspired centuries after his death, and forging it into something you can use. The weapon that bears his design, his function, and his spiritual lineage was last held by the knight you fought in a time-distorted memory in the original game's DLC. In Dark Souls 3, it is assembled, again from the condensed faith of everyone who tried to carry on after he fell. Every swing of it is a reference, and every hit against an abyss creature is a continuation of a war that began before the third game's world was born. Cornyx of the Great Swamp came from a place of exile. Cornyx, the pyromancer trainer you can rescue from a cage in the undead settlement, comes from the Great Swamp, a region historically associated with pyromancy throughout the Soul series as the original home of flame manipulation before it spread to the wider world. He was imprisoned in the cage in the settlement, and his dialogue suggests he had traveled extensively before ending up there. He accepts pyromancy tomes with the particular reverence of someone who treats fire as both discipline and inheritance. The Great Swamp was never a celebrated place. Pyromancers from there were regarded with wariness by mainstream magical institutions. But Cornyx carries himself with the quiet dignity of someone whose tradition is older than the prejudice against it. When you bring him the Quilana Pyromancy Tome, the spells of Quilana of Izalith herself, his response is specifically awed. He recognizes whose work he is holding. He knows the lineage better than most scholars of more prestigious schools ever would. Winged knights were transformed by faith in Gertrude, the enormous, heavily armored, axe-wielding creatures called winged knights that guard the Grand Archives, and Lothric Castle did not begin as the creatures you fight. They were human knights who devoted themselves to the angelic faith of the heavenly daughter Gertrude, and whose devotion was so complete that it physically transformed them. The winged knight helm describes warriors who gave themselves to Gertrude's worship, and the transformation that resulted. The massive frames, the vestigial wing structures, the sheer scale that dwarfs a Lothric knight, is the physical expression of what genuine total faith does to a body in the soul's world. This same principle is visible in the Corvians of the painted world, who grew beaks and feathers through worship of Velka. Faith in the soul's universe is not metaphorical. It changes flesh. The winged knights who patrol Lothric's highest towers, throwing lightning and crushing anything that approaches, are what happens when a human being decides that what they believe in is more true than what their body is. Curse-rotted greatwood was once just a tree. The curse-rotted greatwood, the first major boss in the undead settlement, is a massive tree that has absorbed the curses and suffering of the Hollows, buried and tethered to it throughout the settlement's history. The settlement used it as a kind of spiritual repository. The curses of the condemned were channeled into the tree rather than allowed to dissipate, concentrating decades or centuries of accumulated human suffering into the wood. By the time the Ashen One reaches it, the tree has been warped beyond recognition, grotesque growths covering its trunk and bark, enemies erupting from the curse mass embedded in its surface. Its death releases all of that compressed suffering back into the world, and the transposing kiln it drops allows the Ashen One to begin working with boss souls. A tool made from the concentrated power of something that was just a tree until the world made it into something else. The curse-rotted greatwood is the settlement's history made botanical, a record of everything that was buried there in the shape of roots and bark and rot. The shrine handmaid knows more than she lets on. The shrine handmaid, the hunched, cloaked merchant, who sits near the entrance of Firelink Shrine and sells basic equipment, accepts the ashes of dead NPCs and expands her stock accordingly. She takes Gryret's ashes and sells his goods. She takes Orbek's ashes and sells his spells. She accepts the ashes of enemies and traders alike and incorporates their inventories into hers without comment, without reaction, without any visible acknowledgement that the person she is now representing is gone. Her equanimity about this is either professional detachment or something older. She wears the priestess set, described as ancient attire from a time when firekeepers were more numerous, worn by those who served the old firekeeper tradition before it was consolidated. She may be far older than she appears. Her role at the center of the shrine, accepting the remains of the dead and continuing their commerce, mirrors the function of the bonfire itself, holding what people leave behind and keeping it available to those who come after. The shrine handmaid is the shrine's memory-made merchant,